Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I woke up already holding my phone. That was the first thing that felt wrong. My hand was wrapped around it like I'd been using it right before falling asleep, but I don't fall asleep like that. I always put it on the nightstand. The screen was on. Dim, but still lit. And warm. Not just slightly warm from being under a blanket. It felt like it had been running for a while. I blinked a couple times, trying to clear my head. The room was still dark. Curtains closed. No light coming in from outside. Just that faint glow from the phone. I lifted it slightly, squinting at the screen. The camera app was open. Rear camera, pointed toward the window. That's when I sat up. I didn't remember opening the camera, didn't remember picking the phone up at all. I checked the time, 2:41. I'd gone to bed around midnight. I remembered scrolling for a bit, then putting the phone down. No reason I'd be awake now. I looked back at the camera feed. The image was dark, but I could make out the outline of the window and the curtains. There was a faint light beyond them, not strong enough to illuminate the room, just enough that the camera picked it up as a dull, gray-blue shape. I held the phone steady, staring at it. The light outside didn't look like a street light. Wrong color, and it didn't move. I lowered the phone slightly and looked at the actual window. Still dark. No visible light through the curtains. I raised the phone again. The light was still there on the screen. Same position, same faint glow. That didn't make sense. I shifted my angle slightly, tilting the phone. The image adjusted like it should. The light stayed fixed outside. I stood up slowly, still holding the phone, and walked toward the window. The floor felt cold under my feet. The air in the room felt still, like nothing was moving. I stopped about a foot from the window. The camera feed showed the light more clearly now. It wasn't a single point, more like a soft patch hovering just beyond the glass, no clear edges. Just there. I reached out with my free hand and pulled the curtain back slightly. The moment I did, the phone vibrated. A short, low buzz. I froze. The camera image flickered for a split second, then stabilized. The light was still there. I looked past the curtain. Nothing. Just darkness, no glow, no source. I moved the curtain a bit more. Still nothing outside. But on the phone screen, the light remained. Exactly where it had been. My ears started to feel strange. A slight pressure building. I swallowed, but it didn't clear. I stepped back from the window. The phone stayed pointed toward it. The light didn't change. I lowered the phone and turned it slightly away from the window. The light disappeared from the screen immediately. I turned it back. It reappeared. Same position, same faint glow. My chest tightened a bit. I took another step back. The pressure in my ears increased. I could feel it in my jaw now. The phone vibrated again. Longer this time. I almost dropped it. The camera image flickered again, but this time it distorted. For a split second, the light stretched, not outward, but vertically, like it had depth. Then it snapped back to normal. I stood there, not moving. The phone felt heavier in my hand. Warmer. I checked the time again. Still 2:41. The seconds weren't moving. I stared at it. The numbers stayed frozen. I looked back at the camera feed. The light pulsed, very faint. Just a slight increase in brightness, then back to normal. And for a moment, I thought I saw something behind it. Not a shape, more like a shadow moving through it. I blinked. The effect was gone. The phone vibrated again. This time I felt it through my whole hand. A deeper buzz, almost like it was resonating. The pressure in my ears peaked, sharp enough to make me wince. I turned away from the window quickly. The moment I did, the vibration stopped. The pressure dropped. I looked back at the phone. The camera app was still open, but the light was gone. Just a dark image of the curtains. The time ticked forward. 2:42. I stood there for a second, breathing slowly. Everything felt normal again. The air moved slightly. I could hear faint sounds from outside. I turned back to the window and pulled the curtain open fully. Nothing. Just the street outside. Dark, empty. No lights. I went back to bed, still holding the phone. I didn't remember putting it down, but I must have, because the next thing I remember was waking up to my alarm. Morning light coming through the curtains. Everything normal. I sat up and grabbed my phone. Battery was low, lower than it should have been. I checked the camera roll. There were videos, several of them, all recorded between 2:39 and 2:41. I opened the first one. It showed the same view as before, the window, the curtains, dark. Then the image flickered. The light appeared, faint, hovering beyond the glass. The video stuttered, frames dropped, then it cut to static for a second before ending. I opened another, same thing. But in this one, for a brief moment, the distortion was clearer. The light stretched vertically again, and behind it, something moved. Not defined. Just a darker shift within the glow. I scrubbed through the rest. All similar. Short clips, corrupted frames, that same faint light. In the last video, right before it ended, the camera angle changed slightly, as if the phone had tilted. The light moved closer to the center of the frame, and for a single frame, just one, the distortion cleared. The light wasn't just outside the window, it was right up against the glass, almost touching it. Then the video ended. I checked the phone settings, no timers, no scheduled recordings, nothing that would explain it. I went to the window and looked at the glass, clean, no marks, no condensation, nothing. I stood there for a while, trying to piece it together, but the only thing I couldn't explain was how the phone ended up in my hand, pointed at the window, already recording, before I woke up. I woke up already sitting halfway up. Not fully awake, just that sudden jolt where your body reacts before your brain catches up. My heart was beating faster than it should have been, and I had that clear feeling that someone had just been in the room. Not a vague dream feeling. Specific. Like I'd been watched. I stayed still for a second, listening. The room was dark, curtains closed, no light coming through. Just the faint shape of the wardrobe and the door. Nothing moved. No sound at all. I told myself it was just one of those half-dream things. Your brain misfiring, mixing sleep with reality. But the feeling didn't go away. It lingered, like I'd interrupted something. I reached over slowly and picked up my phone from the bedside table. The screen lit up. 2:23. I stared at it for a second, trying to slow my breathing. Then I looked around the room properly. Door closed, no shadows moving, everything where it should be. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat there for a moment. The air felt off. Not cold, not warm, just still. Like nothing had moved for a while. I stood up. The floor was colder than I expected. I took a step toward the door, then stopped. Something about turning my back to the rest of the room didn't feel right, so I turned slowly instead, scanning everything again. Nothing. Just the same dark shapes. That's when I noticed the window. It was on the far wall, opposite the bed, covered by thick curtains. I couldn't see through them, but something about that side of the room felt different. I walked over slowly. The closer I got, the more I noticed it. The air near the window felt slightly warmer, not by much, just enough to notice compared to the rest of the room. I reached out and touched the curtain. It felt normal. Cool fabric. I slid my hand behind it toward the glass. The moment my fingers brushed the window, I froze. It was warm. Not hot, but definitely warmer than it should have been. The rest of the room was cold enough that I'd felt it on the floor. The window should have been colder, if anything. I pressed my hand against it. The warmth was even across the surface. Not just one spot, the whole pane. I pulled my hand back slowly. The pressure in my ears started then. Subtle, like a slight shift. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I stood there for a second, staring at the curtain. Then I pulled it back. The street outside was empty. No cars, no lights, just the faint outline of houses across the road. Everything looked normal. I leaned closer to the glass, no condensation, no marks, nothing that would explain the warmth. I touched it again. Still warm. That's when I noticed something else. The reflection. At first it looked normal, just a faint outline of the room behind me. Then I shifted slightly, and for a split second, the reflection didn't match. It lagged. Not by much, just a fraction of a second. But enough that I noticed. I blinked, moved my head again. This time it lined up perfectly. I stared at it, trying to recreate it. Nothing. Just normal reflection. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I could feel it in my jaw now. I stepped back from the window. The warmth didn't follow. The air in the room returned to that cooler, still feeling. I let the curtain fall back into place. The moment it did, the pressure dropped. Completely. I stood there for a second, listening. Everything was quiet again. Normal quiet. I turned and walked back toward the bed. Checked my phone again, 2:24. That didn't make sense. It felt like I'd been up longer than that. I lay back slowly, keeping my eyes on the ceiling. The feeling that someone had been there hadn't fully gone. It had just softened. I turned onto my side, facing the wall, closed my eyes. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard something. Not a sound exactly, more like a shift, like air moving in a way it shouldn't. I opened my eyes immediately. The room was the same, no movement, no shapes, but the window side of the room felt different again. I sat up quickly, looked over. The curtain was still. The air felt still, but the warmth was back. I could feel it from where I was sitting now. Faint, but there. I stood up again, walked toward it. Each step, the warmth increased slightly. I stopped a few feet away. The pressure in my ears returned, stronger this time. I didn't reach for the curtain. I just stood there. Then slowly, the warmth faded. The pressure dropped with it. The room felt normal again. I waited a few seconds. Nothing else happened. I went back to bed. Lay there, staring at the ceiling for a while. Eventually, I fell asleep. In the morning, everything looked normal. Sunlight through the curtains, room at a normal temperature. I went over to the window, pulled the curtain back, touched the glass. Cold, exactly how it should be. I stood there for a minute trying to make sense of it. There was nothing to see, no marks, no signs of anything. But when I stepped back just for a second, I had the feeling that if I turned around quickly enough, I might catch something standing near the bed. I didn't try. I just left the room. I stepped outside because I thought I'd left the back gate open. It was late, just after midnight, and I'd already been in bed for a while. I kept thinking I heard something faint from the garden, like a loose latch tapping, but every time I focused on it, it stopped. Eventually, it got annoying enough that I got up to check. I pulled on a hoodie, went downstairs, and opened the back door. The air hit me straight away. Cold, but not sharp. Just still. Too still. Even before I stepped out, I noticed how quiet it was. No wind, no distant traffic, nothing at all. I stepped onto the patio and let the door fall closed behind me. The silence felt heavier outside. Not just quiet, like everything had dropped out at once. I walked over to the gate. It was shut. Latch still in place. I stood there for a second, just looking at it, trying to figure out what I'd been hearing. Nothing. I turned to go back inside. That's when the pressure hit. It came on suddenly, like a shift in altitude. My ears felt blocked instantly, like I needed to pop them. I swallowed. Nothing. The pressure stayed. I looked up without really thinking about it. The sky was mostly clear, but there were thin clouds drifting across, moving slowly enough that you had to watch to notice. At first, everything looked normal. Then I saw the light. It was faint. So faint I almost missed it. Just a dim point, slightly brighter than the surrounding sky, moving between the clouds, not like a star, not fixed. It drifted, slow, steady, and completely silent. I stared at it, trying to focus. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I could feel it in my jaw now. The light moved behind a thin cloud. I expected it to disappear or dim. It didn't. It stayed visible. Just as clear as before, like the cloud wasn't there. That's when I felt that tightness in my chest. I took a step forward into the garden. The moment I did, the light shifted. Not in a smooth way. It just adjusted. Now it was slightly more centered above me. I stopped. The pressure peaked, sharp enough to make me wince. I swallowed again, harder this time. Still nothing. The light held its position. It didn't flicker, didn't change brightness. Just hovered there, drifting slowly between the clouds. But the clouds didn't move the same way around it. That's what started to bother me. They passed in front of it, but didn't obscure it. And the space around it looked slightly off, like the sky there had a different depth. I took another small step forward. The light adjusted again. Same way, no smooth movement, just a shift. Now directly above me. My stomach dropped. I stood still. Didn't move. The pressure in my ears stayed constant. I could feel it behind my eyes now. A dull, tight feeling. The light drifted slightly, but not away. It stayed aligned with me, keeping position. That's when I noticed something else. The air around me felt warmer. Not much. Just enough that I could tell the difference between where I was standing and the rest of the garden. I looked down. The grass at my feet looked normal, but something about the way the shadows sat felt wrong, like they weren't matching the direction of the light. I glanced back toward the house. The patio door was closed, curtains drawn. Everything looked normal. I turned back to the sky. The light pulsed. Just once. A slight increase in brightness, and for a second I thought I saw something around it. Not a shape, more like the space around it bent, like a ripple. Then it was gone. The light dimmed back to its original level. The pressure in my ears dropped slightly. I took a step back. The light didn't follow immediately. It held position for a second, then shifted again, back into alignment. That's when I realized it wasn't reacting instantly. There was a delay. Small, but there. I took another step back, waited. The light stayed where it was. Then, after a second, it adjusted. My chest tightened further. I stepped back again, closer to the patio. The pressure eased slightly. The light didn't move this time. It stayed above the center of the garden, not following me anymore. I stopped moving, waited. The light drifted sideways, away from where I was standing. Slow, smooth motion, back toward the clouds. The pressure in my ears dropped further. I could feel it easing out. The light moved behind a thicker patch of cloud. This time, it dimmed, then disappeared completely. The silence broke all at once. A faint breeze through the trees, a distant car somewhere. Normal sounds returning. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the sky. Nothing. No light. No distortion. I went back inside, closed the door. The house felt loud again. Fridge humming, pipes shifting. Everything normal. I checked the time on my phone. 1:14. That didn't make sense. I'd gone to bed around 12:30. It hadn't felt like that long. I stood there in the kitchen for a minute trying to think it through. It didn't add up. The next night, I went outside again. Same time, same spot. The sky was clear. No clouds this time, no light, no pressure, everything normal. But every now and then, when I stand in that same place, I feel that slight shift in my ears again. Just for a second, like something is directly above me, waiting for me to notice it. I woke up before my alarm, and the first thing I noticed was that I felt like I wasn't alone. Not in a dramatic way, just that quiet, instinctive feeling, like when someone's standing too close behind you and you haven't turned around yet. My room was still dark. It was early, maybe just before sunrise. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, nothing out of place. Just the usual quiet, maybe a faint hum from the fridge downstairs. After a few seconds, I told myself I was just coming out of a weird dream. That happens sometimes. You wake up and your brain hasn't caught up yet, so I rolled over, reached for my phone, and checked the time. 5:12 a.m. That's when I noticed the window. My bedroom window is right beside the bed. I usually keep the curtains half open so I can get some light in the morning. But that morning, the light coming through didn't look right. It wasn't sunrise light. It was softer, kind of dull, like it was being filtered through something. I pushed myself up onto one elbow and looked at it properly. The glass looked slightly fogged, not fully misted, just uneven, like there were patches of warmth against it. That didn't make sense. It had been cold that night. The heating shuts off around midnight, and the room usually gets a bit chilly by morning. I leaned over and put my hand on the glass. It was warm. Not hot, but definitely warmer than the room. Enough that I pulled my hand back for a second, just out of surprise. I sat there for a bit, staring at it. Then I got out of bed and walked over. Up close, I could see that the fogging wasn't random. It was almost like something had been pressed close to the outside of the window. Not a clear shape, but areas where the condensation had formed differently. I wiped a bit of it with my sleeve and looked out. My backyard was empty. It was still dim outside, that early morning gray where everything looks flat. The fence, the shed, the patch of grass, it all looked normal. No one standing there, no movement. I stayed there for maybe a minute, just looking. Then I noticed the smell. It was faint, but it wasn't something I recognized. Not exactly chemical, not exactly natural, just off. Like warm plastic or something that had been sitting in the sun too long, except it was cold outside. I opened the window slightly. The smell didn't get stronger. If anything, it faded a bit. That made it worse somehow. I closed it again and locked it, even though I always keep it locked anyway. After that, I didn't go back to sleep. I just sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for it to get properly light outside. Once it did, everything looked completely normal again. The glass cooled down, the fogging disappeared, The smell was gone. I even checked outside later that morning before leaving for work. Nothing. No footprints, no marks near the window, nothing disturbed. I tried to brush it off, told myself it was just a weird mix of temperature, and maybe I'd imagined the rest. But that night, something else happened. I went to bed around midnight. Same as usual. Nothing out of the ordinary. Sometime during the night, I woke up again. This time I knew exactly what pulled me out of sleep. There was a faint sound like a low humming. Not loud, more like something you feel than hear. At first I thought it was coming from inside the house, maybe the boiler or something electrical, but as I lay there, I realized it didn't have a clear direction. It felt like it was just everywhere. I didn't sit up right away. I just lay there, listening. The same feeling came back, that quiet sense of being watched. I turned my head slowly toward the window. The curtains were still half open, and again, the light didn't look right. It was brighter this time, but not in a way that made sense for the time of night. It wasn't street light, it wasn't moonlight, it was more even, like the light wasn't coming from a single point. I sat up slowly, keeping my eyes on it. The humming got slightly stronger. Not louder exactly, just more noticeable, like it was syncing with my breathing or something. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. As I got closer to the window, the warmth hit me before I touched it. Same as before. The glass was warm again, but this time, the condensation patterns were clearer. There were shapes in it. Not perfect outlines, but enough that my brain tried to make sense of them. Long, vertical patches, side by side, like something had been right up against the glass. More than one thing. I didn't want to look outside, but I did. I wiped a section of the glass with my hand and leaned in slightly. At first I didn't see anything, just the yard, dimly lit. Then I noticed the fence. The top of it looked wrong, like the line wasn't straight anymore. I squinted, trying to focus, and then I realized it wasn't the fence that was off. It was the space above it. There was a faint glow hanging there. Not bright, not defined. Just a slightly lighter patch of air, like heat distortion on a road in summer. It wasn't high up, maybe just a few feet above the fence line, and it wasn't still. It was shifting, not moving side to side, just changing shape slightly, like it couldn't hold a fixed outline. The humming got stronger. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. I stepped back from the window. The moment I did, the humming dropped off, not completely, but enough that it felt distant again. I stood there, not sure what to do. Part of me wanted to go downstairs, turn all the lights on, maybe even go outside and check. But I didn't. I stayed in my room. After a minute or two, I went back to the window. The glow was gone. The fence looked normal again. The glass was still warm but cooling. The condensation patterns were fading, and the humming had stopped completely. I didn't sleep after that. I just waited for morning again. Over the next few days, I kept checking the window, especially early in the morning. Nothing happened. No warmth, no fogging, no smell. But one thing stuck with me. On the third morning, I went outside before work and stood in the yard right where the window looks out. I turned around and looked up at it from outside, and for a second I felt that same thing again, like someone was inside, standing right up against the glass, watching me. I checked later. No one was there. But the inside of the window had a faint patch of condensation on it. From the outside, looked like something had been close enough to warm the glass from within. I noticed the compass first because I kept checking it more than usual. The trail runs along a narrow ridge, and even though it's marked, there are sections where it splits off into animal paths or just fades into rock. I'd been up there before, but not alone and not that late in the day. It was already getting dim when I reached the higher part. The sun had dipped behind the hills, but there was still that dull orange light sitting low along the horizon. I stopped for a second to get my bearings. The compass in my hand didn't look right. At first I thought I was just holding it at a weird angle. I flattened my palm and looked again. The needle was off by maybe 10 degrees. Not a lot, but enough that it caught my attention. I rotated slowly, expecting it to swing and settle. It didn't. It drifted a bit, then stopped again, still off. I tapped the side of it lightly with my finger. Nothing. I turned my body in a full circle, watching it. The needle moved, but it didn't feel consistent. It lagged, then corrected slightly, then drifted again. I'd used that compass for years. It wasn't broken. I looked up, scanning the ridge. Nothing out of place, just rock, low shrubs, and the steep drop on either side. The wind had died down too. Earlier it had been steady enough to keep a constant sound in the background, but now it was still. I put the compass back in my pocket and kept walking. The trail narrowed at that point, hugging the ridgeline. On one side, it dropped into a long slope of loose rock. On the other, it fell more sharply into a wooded area. I stayed focused on my footing, but every so often I'd glance up at the horizon. The light was fading faster than I expected. After a couple of minutes, I stopped again and pulled the compass out. Same thing. The needle wasn't settling properly. This time, it slowly rotated on its own, just a few degrees, then stopped again like it had hit resistance. I frowned at it, turning it in my hand. There was no reason for it to behave like that. I held it out in front of me, away from my body, thinking maybe something metal on me was interfering. No change. I slipped it back into my pocket, but I didn't feel right about it. I checked my phone next. No signal. That wasn't unusual up there, but I still checked out of habit. The time looked normal, but for some reason I didn't trust it. I started walking again, a bit faster this time. The sky had shifted to that deeper blue just before it turns fully dark. And that's when I saw the glow. It was faint. Low on the horizon, just above the line where the hills dipped. At first I thought it was just the last of the sunset catching on something, maybe a cloud. But there weren't any clouds. The sky was clear in that direction. The glow didn't spread like normal light either. It was contained. A small, dim patch that pulsed once. Not bright, just a subtle increase, then back to what it was. I stopped walking. My first thought was maybe it was a distant light from a building or a car, but it didn't flicker like that, and it didn't move. I stood there for a minute, watching it. It didn't pulse again. Just stayed there, faint and steady. I pulled the compass out again without really thinking. The needle was spinning. Not fast, but continuously. It wasn't settling at all. I held it steady, watching it rotate. Slow, smooth, no hesitation. I felt a shift in my stomach, like something wasn't lining up. I looked back up at the horizon. The glow dimmed slightly. Then it disappeared. Not like it went out, more like it blended back into the darkness. I couldn't tell exactly when it was gone. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The ridge felt different now, quieter. Not just the wind, everything. Even my footsteps sounded muted, like the ground was softer than it should have been. I turned around to look behind me. The trail stretched back the way I'd come, fading into the darker section of the ridge. For a second, I thought I saw movement, just at the edge of where I could see. I stared at it. Nothing. Probably just my eyes adjusting. I turned back forward and started walking again. Faster now. I didn't like being up there in the dark, especially with the compass acting like that. After a few minutes, I noticed something else. The trail didn't look familiar, not in a big way. Just small things. A rock I didn't remember, a bend that felt slightly off. I stopped again, trying to get my bearings. The compass was still spinning. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The time hadn't changed. That didn't make sense. I'd been walking for several minutes at least. I locked the screen and unlocked it again. Same time. I felt a tightness in my chest, not panic, just a steady unease. I turned slowly, scanning the ridge. Everything looked the same. No clear landmarks, just shapes in the dark. Then I saw the glow again. This time it wasn't on the horizon. It was higher, off to my right, just above the line of the ridge. It didn't pulse this time. It just appeared, faint like before. I stared at it, trying to judge how far away it was. I couldn't. It didn't give me any sense of distance. It could have been 100 meters away or miles. The compass in my hand jerked slightly. Not a smooth movement. A quick shift like it had snapped to a new position. Then it stopped spinning. The needle pointed somewhere I didn't expect. Not north, not any direction that made sense. I looked up again. The glow seemed closer, not moving toward me, just more present, like it had more weight to it. The air felt different, heavier. I took a step back without thinking. My foot slipped slightly on loose rock and I caught myself. When I looked up again, the glow dimmed. Then it pulsed, just once, stronger than before, and I felt it, not physically, but like a pressure in my chest. I stepped back again, this time more carefully. The moment I did, the glow faded. Not completely gone, but weaker. I turned away from it. I didn't care about the compass anymore. I just started walking. I didn't run, but I moved as fast as I could without risking slipping. I didn't look back. The trail eventually widened and I started recognizing things again. The rocks looked familiar. The slope eased off. After a while, I saw the lower section where the path meets the tree line. I kept going until I was off the ridge completely. Only then did I stop. I checked my phone again. The time had jumped forward. Nearly an hour. I stood there trying to piece together how long I'd actually been up there. It didn't match what I remembered. I pulled the compass out one last time. The needle was steady again, pointing north like it should. I didn't go back up that ridge after that. A few days later, I checked the compass at home. It worked perfectly. But sometimes when I think about that glow, I realize I can't remember exactly where it was in relation to the ridge. It doesn't line up in my head the way it should. I only found out about it because Mrs. Halverson stopped me while I was taking the bins out. It was early, just after 8, still cold from the night before. There was frost on the car roofs and that thin crunch under your shoes when you walk across the pavement. She was standing by her gate, already dressed. She'd been up for a while. "Were you having work done last night?" she asked. I told her no. She frowned a bit, looking past me at my house. "I thought I saw lights," she said. "Above your roof, around 2, maybe later." I didn't know what to say to that at first. "What kind of lights?" I asked. She shrugged. "Hard to tell. Not like a helicopter. They weren't moving like that." I laughed a little, mostly out of confusion. "I was asleep," I said. "Didn't hear anything." She nodded slowly, like she wasn't fully convinced. "They were quiet," she added. "That's what made it strange." I said something like, "Probably just a drone," even though I didn't really believe that. No one around here flies drones at 2 in the morning, especially not hovering over someone else's house. She didn't argue, just gave a small nod and went back inside. I stood there for a second, looking up at my roof. Nothing looked out of place. Later that morning, it started bothering me more. Not in a dramatic way. Just enough that I kept thinking about how she said they were quiet. I have a small camera set up over the front door. It covers the driveway and part of the street. Nothing fancy, just something I installed after a break-in a couple of streets over. I figured I'd check it. I opened the app and scrolled back to around 2 a.m. The footage looked normal at first. A car passed by around 1:47. A cat crossed the driveway at 2:03. Then at 2:16, something changed. The video stuttered. Not a full cut, just a slight glitch, like a frame dropped. Then it happened again. A quick flicker. I slowed it down. For a split second, the image brightened. Not like someone turned on a light. More like the whole frame shifted slightly, like exposure jumped up and then back down. I watched it a few more times. The timestamp didn't skip, it just kept counting normally. At 2:17, it happened again. This time, the flicker was stronger. The image warped slightly, like the compression broke for a moment. There were blocks in the video where things didn't line up properly. I paused it on one of those frames. The driveway looked distorted. The car parked out front, my car, looked slightly stretched. And above it, near the top edge of the frame, there was something. Not clear. Just a faint, uneven brightness, like a reflection or glare, but it didn't match anything I could think of. I kept watching. Between 2:17 and 2:22, the footage kept glitching, short flickers. Corrupted frames, nothing long enough to clearly see anything, just fragments. At one point, the entire frame shifted sideways for a single frame, like the camera had moved, but I know it hadn't. Then everything went back to normal. At 2:23, the video looked completely fine again. No more flickering, no distortion. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. It didn't look like a normal camera issue. Usually when it glitches, it freezes or skips. This was different. It felt interrupted, like something had passed through the frame rather than the camera failing. I went outside after that, stood in the driveway and looked up. The sky was clear. Nothing unusual. I checked the camera itself, still mounted where it always was. No damage, no signs it had been touched. I even restarted it just in case. That evening, I saw Mrs. Halverson again. She asked if I'd checked the footage. I told her I had. "What did you see?" she asked. I hesitated. "Nothing clear," I said. "Just some glitches." She nodded slowly. "They were there for a while," she said. "Not moving much, just hovering." How many? I asked. She thought for a second. 3, I think, maybe 4, hard to tell. They weren't very bright. I didn't say anything to that. That night, I stayed up later than usual. Not intentionally. I just didn't feel like going to bed. Around 1:30, I went outside. The air was colder than the night before. Still, quiet. I stood in the driveway, looking up. Nothing. Just the usual stars and the faint glow from the town further out. I stayed there for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing changed. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat in the living room. Around 2:10, I checked the camera feed again. Live view. Everything looked normal. Then at 2:14, the screen flickered. Just once. A quick shift in brightness. I leaned closer. It happened again. The same kind of distortion as the night before. Short, fragmented. I looked up from the screen toward the ceiling, then toward the front door. I didn't hear anything. No hum, no movement. I went back to the app. The image warped again. This time, for a split second, the entire frame went brighter. And in that brightness, I thought I saw something. Not a shape I could describe. Just an absence, like part of the image didn't belong. I stood up and walked to the front door. I didn't open it right away. I just stood there, hand on the handle, listening. Nothing. I unlocked it slowly and opened it just enough to look outside. The street was empty. Same as before. No lights overhead, no movement. I stepped out onto the driveway. The air felt slightly different, not colder. Just heavier. I looked up. Nothing. I stayed there for a few seconds. Then I noticed something small. The light above the door, the porch light, flickered. Not fully off. Just a quick dip in brightness. I looked back inside. The lights in the house didn't change. Just that one. I looked back up at the sky. Still nothing, but I had this strong feeling that something had just been there. Not visible anymore. Just recently gone. I went back inside and shut the door. The camera feed on my phone stabilized again. No more flickering. I didn't go back out that night. The next morning, I checked the footage again. Same thing as before. Between 2:14 and 2:18, the video was filled with brief distortions. Short flashes, corrupted frames, nothing clear. Just pieces that didn't line up properly. Mrs. Halverson didn't bring it up again after that. But sometimes when I check the camera now, I pause on those frames, and I keep noticing the same thing. In the moments where the image breaks, the space above the driveway doesn't look empty. I woke up before my alarm, and I knew something was off before I even opened my eyes. The room felt too bright for that time of morning. Not in a normal way, like sunrise creeping in through the curtains. It was sharper than that, more focused. I rolled over and checked my phone. 5:06 a.m. That didn't line up. It should have still been dark. I sat up and looked toward the window. The curtains were half closed, but there was a strip of light cutting through the gap. Not wide, not spreading. Just a narrow, straight line. At first I thought it was something outside, maybe a car parked in a weird angle with headlights hitting the house. But the light wasn't moving, it was fixed. I got out of bed and walked over. As I got closer, I noticed the color. It wasn't warm like sunlight, it was pale. Almost white, but with a slight blue edge to it. I pulled the curtain aside just a bit. The line of light was coming from the sky, not from the ground. I frowned and opened the curtain fully. The sky should have been slowly brightening across the horizon. Instead, there was a single vertical band of light rising straight up. It started just above the rooftops across the street and extended upward into the sky, narrow and precise, like someone had drawn a line. Everything else around it was still dark. Not pitch black, but that pre-dawn gray. The line didn't spread outward. It didn't soften or blend. It just stayed there. I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I noticed something else. The edges of the light weren't stable. They shifted slightly, not flickering, just adjusting. Like the line wasn't completely fixed in place. I opened the window. Cold air came in, and everything outside was quiet. No cars, no birds, nothing. I leaned out slightly, looking up. The line went higher than I could comfortably track without stepping outside. So I pulled on a hoodie and went downstairs. By the time I got to the front door, the light was still there. Same position, same intensity. I stepped outside onto the pavement. The street was empty. A couple of houses had lights on inside, but no one else was outside. I looked up again. The vertical line of light stood out even more clearly from here. It wasn't wide, maybe the width of a street lamp from a distance, but it was perfectly straight, no tapering, no uneven spread, and it wasn't illuminating the sky around it. The clouds, what little there were, weren't catching it. It was like the light existed on its own. I took a few steps into the street for a better angle. That's when I felt it, a faint pressure in my ears. Not painful, just noticeable, like when you change elevation quickly. I swallowed a couple of times, trying to clear it. It didn't fully go away. I kept watching the line. It didn't move, didn't grow, didn't fade, just held steady. Then, slowly, something changed. The bottom of the line began to lift. Not quickly, gradually, like it was being pulled upward from the ground. The lowest point rose higher, leaving darkness behind it. I stared at it, trying to track the movement. The rest of the line stayed the same length, but the entire thing shifted upward. The base climbed higher into the sky. The pressure in my ears increased slightly as it did. I took a step back without thinking. The air felt heavier. Not thick, just present in a way I couldn't ignore. I looked around, half expecting to see something else reacting. Nothing. The houses were still. No lights turning on, no movement. I looked back up. The line continued to retract. The bottom rose higher and higher, like the light was being drawn upward into a single point. The top didn't extend further. It just stayed fixed as the rest of it shortened. I realized then that it wasn't a line stretching upward, it was something pulling back. The lower end reached the height of the rooftops, then above them, then higher still. The pressure in my ears peaked for a moment, enough that I winced slightly, and then suddenly it stopped. The line was now much shorter, hanging in the sky like a narrow column. It held there for a second, then it collapsed, not outward, upward. The entire thing retracted into a single point, a small bright dot, and then that dot vanished. No fade, no trail, just gone. The sky returned to normal immediately. The faint gray of early morning spread evenly across the horizon. The pressure in my ears dropped off. I stood there for a few seconds just looking at the empty sky, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The first real signs of sunrise started to appear a few minutes later. Soft, gradual light spreading like it should. I went back inside. Checked my phone again. 5:09 a.m. 3 minutes. That's all it said had passed. I stood by the window for a while longer, watching the normal sunrise. It didn't feel real compared to what I'd just seen. Later that day, I asked a couple of neighbors if they'd been up early. No one mentioned anything unusual, just the usual comments about the cold and the early light. That night, I kept thinking about the way the light moved. Not spreading, not fading, just pulling away. And how, for a few minutes, the sky didn't behave the way it was supposed to. I was about halfway home when I noticed my shadow didn't look right. It was late, maybe just past 11, and I'd taken the longer route back from Marco's place. The streets were mostly empty by then, just the occasional parked car and a few porch lights still on. There were street lights, but they were spaced out enough that you'd walk through patches of brightness and then stretches of dimness. I'd done that walk plenty of times. Nothing unusual about it. I was just moving along, hands in my pockets, not really thinking about anything. Then I stepped into one of the lit sections, and my shadow stretched out in front of me. That part was normal, but it didn't stop where it should have. It kept going, longer than the distance to the next dark patch. I slowed down without meaning to, watching it. At first, I thought maybe I'd misjudged where the light was hitting from, like there was another source I hadn't noticed. But the streetlight was directly behind me. There wasn't anything else. My shadow kept stretching, thin and long, like it was being pulled further than it should. Then it snapped back. Not instantly, but quickly enough that it felt wrong, like something had let go of it. I stopped walking. I turned around, looking at the streetlight behind me. It looked normal, steady, no flickering. I glanced up at it, half expecting to see something above. Maybe another light source I hadn't noticed. Nothing. Just the lamp and the dark sky around it. I turned back and looked at the ground again. My shadow looked normal now. Shorter, in proportion to where I was standing. I stood there for a second, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. Then I started walking again. I told myself it was just a weird angle, maybe light bouncing off a window or something, but there weren't any windows nearby that would reflect that far. The houses on that stretch are set back from the road, with hedges and fences blocking most of the light. I kept moving, a bit more aware now. The next streetlight came up ahead. I slowed down before stepping into it. As I crossed into the light, I watched my shadow carefully. It stretched out in front of me like before. Normal. Then it started to lengthen again. Not as extreme as the first time, but enough that I noticed. I stopped mid-step. The shadow kept extending for a second longer, even though I'd stopped moving. Then it snapped back again. This time I felt something when it happened. Not a sound, more like a shift in the air. Subtle, like the pressure changed for a split second. I looked up immediately. The sky was mostly clear, just a few thin clouds drifting slowly. And for a moment I thought I saw something. A faint, dim light overhead. Not bright, not defined. Just a slightly lighter patch moving across the sky. It faded almost as soon as I noticed it. I stood there, staring up, trying to track where it had gone. Nothing. Just the clouds, moving like they should. I looked back down at the ground. My shadow was normal again. I didn't like the feeling building in my chest. Not panic, just a quiet sense that something wasn't adding up. I kept walking, but slower, more careful. The next section of the street didn't have a light for a while. It was darker there, with trees lining one side and a fence on the other. I could still see my shadow faintly from a distant light behind me, but it wasn't as clear. As I moved through that darker stretch, I noticed something else. The temperature felt off. Not colder or warmer exactly, just inconsistent, like pockets of air that didn't match each other. I walked through one spot where it felt slightly warmer, then a few steps later it dropped again. There wasn't any wind, nothing that would explain it. I slowed down again, paying more attention. Then I heard something. A faint sound above me. Not loud enough to be obvious, but there, like a low hum. I stopped walking and looked up. The trees blocked most of the sky in that section. I stepped out from under them into a small gap where I could see more clearly. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I caught it. That same dim light. Higher this time, moving slowly. It didn't travel in a straight line. It drifted slightly, like it was adjusting its path. The hum got a bit stronger, still faint, but more noticeable now that I was focusing on it. I stood there watching. The light didn't blink or flicker. It just moved. Then it dimmed. Gradually, like it was fading into the sky, and as it did, the hum faded with it, until it was gone. I stayed there for a few seconds longer, listening. Nothing. The street was quiet again. I looked down at the ground. There was barely any shadow now, just a faint outline from the distant light. I started walking again. The next streetlight came up ahead. I hesitated before stepping into it. Then I did. My shadow formed in front of me. Normal. For a second. Then it stretched again. Longer than it should have. This time I didn't stop. I kept walking forward, watching it. It extended ahead of me, thin and distorted. Then it snapped back. At the exact moment it did, I felt that same shift in the air. And I heard the hum again. Stronger this time. I looked up. The light was back, directly above me, not far up. Still dim, but clearer than before. I couldn't make out a shape, just a glow. A small, contained area of light that didn't match anything else in the sky. It wasn't moving now. It was just there. The hum stayed steady. I stopped walking. My shadow stretched again, even though I wasn't moving. Longer and longer, pulling away from my feet. I felt my chest tighten slightly. Not pain, just pressure. I took a step backward. The shadow snapped back immediately. The light above dimmed. The hum dropped in pitch. I took another step back. The light faded further. The hum softened. I didn't turn around. I just kept stepping back, slowly. Each step made the light dim more. The hum grew quieter, until it was gone. Completely. I stood there, breathing a bit heavier than I expected. The streetlight buzzed faintly above me. My shadow looked normal again, short in proportion. I looked up. The sky was empty. No glow, no movement. Just the same thin clouds drifting. I didn't stop again after that. I walked straight home, not looking up. When I got to my street, everything felt normal again. The air was consistent. The lights behaved like they should. My shadow stayed where it was supposed to. I unlocked my door and went inside. Later that night, I stood by the window and looked out at the streetlight in front of the house. I watched my shadow on the pavement for a while. It didn't stretch. It didn't move on its own. It just stayed there. But every now and then, I caught myself looking up, expecting to see that faint light again. and wondering how something overhead could change something on the ground without leaving anything behind. I was just sitting in my car, engine off, not really doing anything. It was late, around 10:30, parked outside my friend Nina's place. I dropped her off after we grabbed food, and I didn't feel like driving home right away. It had been a long day, and sometimes I just sit for a bit before heading back. The street was quiet. It's one of those suburban roads where everything looks the same. Semi-detached houses, short driveways, a couple of streetlights spaced out just enough that there are darker patches in between. There was a light drizzle earlier, but it had stopped. The pavement still looked damp under the streetlights, and every now and then you'd hear a drop fall from a tree or gutter. I had my phone in my hand, scrolling without really paying attention. Then I felt it, a quick vibration through the seat. Not strong, just enough to notice. Like when a heavy truck passes nearby and you feel it through the ground. Except there were no trucks. I looked up immediately, checking my mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me. No headlights. No cars coming down the street. I sat still for a second, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. I told myself it was probably just something mechanical, maybe the car settling or the engine cooling, even though it didn't feel like that. I went back to my phone. A few seconds later, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from one of the streetlights. A faint glow, low and soft, but it wasn't where the streetlight should have been. It was centered differently, like it was coming from somewhere behind the car, not above. I shifted slightly in my seat and looked directly through the back window. Nothing. Just the road behind me, empty, with the same stretch of damp pavement and the silhouette of parked cars further down. I looked back at the mirror. The glow was still there, faint but steady. It didn't flicker like a light source should. It just existed. I leaned forward a bit, adjusting the angle of the mirror with my hand. The glow moved with it, staying in the center. That didn't make sense. If it were a reflection, it should have shifted or disappeared depending on the angle. I adjusted it again. Same thing. Still centered, I felt that quiet, creeping unease start to build. Not panic, just that feeling that something wasn't lining up properly. I turned slightly in my seat and looked over my shoulder again, more carefully this time. Still nothing. No movement, no light source I could point to. I checked the side mirrors. Empty. The glow stayed only in the rear view. I sat back and stared at it. After a few seconds, I noticed it wasn't completely static. It changed slightly, not moving, but pulsing. Very subtle, like it would get just a bit brighter, then return to normal. I held my breath without realizing it, watching for the next change. There it was again. A small increase in brightness, then back down. I reached for the door handle without taking my eyes off the mirror. Then I stopped. Something about opening the door didn't feel right. I don't know why. It just didn't. So instead, I rolled the window down a few inches. Cold air came in. No sound. No hum, no movement. Nothing that would explain what I was seeing. I looked at the mirror again. The glow seemed slightly larger now. Not by much, but enough that I noticed it. I adjusted the mirror one more time. Still centered. That's when I realized it wasn't reflecting anything. It was just there, in the mirror. I turned my head slowly and looked straight back through the rear window again. Nothing. Just darkness and the faint outline of the street. I turned back to the mirror. Still there, the glow pulsed again. This time I felt something at the same moment. A faint vibration. Not as sharp as the first one. More like a low, steady tremor that lasted maybe a second. It came up through the seat and into my back. Then it stopped. I froze. The glow dimmed slightly after that, like it had reacted to something. I swallowed and looked down at my phone. No signal. That didn't make sense. I'd had full bars just a minute ago. I glanced back at the mirror. The glow was still there, but weaker now. I don't know how long I sat like that, watching it, waiting for it to change again. Eventually it started to fade, slowly. Not like a light turning off. More like it was moving further away. The edges softened until it was barely visible. Then it was gone. I stayed in the car for another minute, just staring at the mirror. Nothing came back. I checked behind me again. The street looked completely normal. A couple of lights in distant houses, a parked car down the road, nothing unusual. My phone signal came back. Full bars like before. I started the engine and sat there for a second longer. Part of me wanted to stay and figure out what it had been, but I didn't. I pulled away slowly, checking the mirrors more than usual. As I drove off, I glanced at the rear view one last time. Nothing there, just the empty road behind me. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a bit, engine running. I checked the mirror again. No glow, no reflection that didn't belong. Everything looked normal. I even adjusted the mirror a few times, trying to recreate what I'd seen. Nothing. I shut the car off and went inside. Later that night, I thought about the way it stayed centered in the mirror, how it didn't match anything behind me, and how the vibration came right when it got brighter. The next day, I went back to Nina's street in the afternoon, parked in the same spot. Sat there for a while. Nothing happened, but I noticed something small. When I adjusted the rearview mirror, it didn't quite sit the same way it used to. Like the angle was slightly off, even when it looked straight. I tried to fix it, but it never felt exactly right again. I stepped outside because I thought I heard something in the yard. It was just after dusk, not fully dark yet. The sky still had that dull blue-gray look with thin clouds stretched across it. I'd been inside all evening, windows closed, so the air hit me a bit colder than I expected. I stood on the back patio for a second, just listening. Nothing moved. No wind through the trees, no distant traffic, not even the usual dog barking from a few houses over. It was quiet in a way that felt a bit off, but not enough to worry about. Then my ears popped, like when you're on a plane or driving up a hill too fast. It happened suddenly, both ears at once. A quick pressure shift, like something had pushed inward and then released. I swallowed a couple of times, trying to clear it, but it didn't fully go away. I looked up automatically, like the sky might explain it. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Just clouds, thin and uneven, drifting slowly. A few gaps where darker skies showed through. I stayed out there for another minute, waiting for my ears to go back to normal. They didn't. If anything, the pressure came back in short pulses. Not painful, just noticeable. Like a subtle change in altitude that kept resetting. I walked a few steps into the yard, away from the house, and tilted my head slightly, trying to equalize it. That's when I noticed the light. It was small, really small. At first, I thought it was a star peeking through a gap in the clouds. But it didn't look right. It was too soft, not sharp like a star should be. And it wasn't steady. It drifted, slowly, not across the sky like a plane or satellite. It moved between the clouds, kind of weaving like it wasn't following a straight path. I narrowed my eyes, trying to track it. It passed behind a thin layer of cloud and dimmed slightly, but didn't disappear completely. That's what made me focus on it. If it were a plane, the light would blink or move in a straight line. If it were a star, it wouldn't move like that at all. This just drifted. The pressure in my ears pulsed again, a bit stronger this time. I swallowed, rubbed the side of my jaw, tried to pop them properly. No change. I checked my phone out of habit, thinking maybe the time would help me make sense of how long I'd been standing there. No signal. That was unusual. I usually had full bars at home. I moved the phone around, held it up, but nothing came back. I looked up again. The light had shifted slightly to the left. Still slow. Still steady. It didn't leave a trail or flicker. Just moved. I started to get that feeling that I should go back inside. Not panic. Just a quiet thought, like I'd stayed out a bit too long without realizing it. But I didn't move. I kept watching. The clouds above it seemed to react in a way I couldn't quite explain. Not moving faster or anything obvious. Just adjusting. Like the space around the light was slightly different from the rest of the sky. The pressure in my ears deepened for a moment. This time, it came with a faint sound. Not exactly a tone. More like a low, distant hum. It wasn't coming from any direction I could point to. It felt like it was inside the air itself. I turned slightly, looking around the yard, half expecting to see something on the ground, causing it. Nothing. Everything looked normal. I looked back up. The light had stopped. Not completely still, but its movement slowed enough that it looked almost fixed in place. Then it dipped. Just slightly. A small downward shift, like it had dropped a few feet relative to the clouds. I felt the pressure in my ears spike at the exact same time. Sharp enough that I winced a bit. I took a step back without thinking. The hum got stronger for a second, then settled again. I realized my breathing had changed. I was taking slower, more deliberate breaths without meaning to. The air felt heavier, not thick, just harder to ignore. I took another step back, closer to the patio. The light moved again. This time it drifted toward a thicker patch of cloud. As it entered it, it didn't vanish completely. It dimmed, but I could still see it through the cloud like a faint glow. Then it stopped again, and for a moment, everything went completely still. The clouds, the air, even the faint sounds from the distance. It felt like the entire space had paused. The pressure in my ears held steady, like it was waiting for something. Then the light brightened. Not suddenly, but enough that it stood out clearly through the cloud. And I had this strange sense that it was closer than it should have been. I couldn't judge distance properly, but it didn't feel as far away as a plane or a star. It felt lower. I stepped back onto the patio. The moment my foot crossed that line, the pressure in my ears dropped slightly. Not gone, but reduced. I noticed it immediately. I stepped forward again off the patio. The pressure increased. I froze there, 1 foot on the edge, 1 foot in the yard. The difference was subtle but real. I pulled back fully onto the patio. The pressure eased again. I stood there trying to process that. Then I looked up. The light was gone. Not dimmed, not behind cloud, just gone. The clouds continued drifting like normal. The hum faded completely. The air felt lighter. I waited for a few seconds, expecting it to come back. It didn't. My ears slowly returned to normal, the pressure easing until it felt like nothing had happened. I checked my phone again, still no signal. Then, after maybe a minute, it came back. Full bars, like usual. I checked the time. It didn't look right. I'd gone outside around 7:40. The phone said 8:25. I stood there for a bit longer, just looking at the sky. Everything looked normal, clouds moving, no strange lights. I went back inside and shut the door. The house felt quiet in a normal way again. Later that night, I went out again, just to check. Clear sky. No clouds at all. I stood in the same spot in the yard, waiting to feel that pressure again. Nothing happened. But for a second, I caught myself looking up at the exact spot where the light had been, and I realized I couldn't tell how far away it had actually been. The power went out just after 11. I remember because I was in the middle of heating something up and the microwave just cut off mid-hum. The whole house dropped into silence in a way that felt immediate and heavy, like something had been switched off all at once. At first, I didn't think much of it. Power cuts happen out here every now and then, especially in winter. It had been cold all day, and there was a bit of wind earlier in the evening. I grabbed my phone for the flashlight and checked the fuse box out of habit. Everything looked fine, no tripped switches. The house felt colder already, or maybe I just noticed it more without the background noise. I went into the living room and looked out the front window. The whole street was dark. No porch lights, no street lights, nothing from the houses across the road. Just a few faint shapes where cars were parked and the outline of the trees at the end of the cul-de-sac. I checked my phone again. No signal. That part didn't sit right. Even during outages, I usually had at least 1 bar. I moved around the room a bit, holding the phone up, but nothing changed. After a minute or two, I lit a couple of candles and sat down on the couch. It was quiet in a way that felt wrong. Not just the house, everything outside too. No distant traffic, no dogs, nothing. I remember thinking it felt like the sound had been turned down along with the lights. After maybe 5 minutes, I got up again and went back to the window. That's when I noticed the sky. It wasn't fully overcast, but there were low clouds moving slowly across. Normally, even with clouds, you get some light from nearby towns or the moon reflecting off them. But the sky looked darker than usual, except for one part. Just above the line of houses across the street, there was a patch of cloud that looked slightly brighter. Not white, not gray, blue. Faint, but noticeable. At first, I thought it might be light from somewhere else, maybe a generator or something reflecting upward, but the color didn't match anything I'd seen before. It wasn't a strong glow. More like the cloud itself was holding onto a dim blue tint. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to get a better look. The patch wasn't large, maybe the size of a small house if you mapped it onto the sky, and it wasn't moving with the rest of the clouds. The other clouds were drifting slowly left to right. That patch stayed in place. I stood there for a while, just watching it. Then I noticed something else. The edges of the blue area weren't stable. They shifted slightly, like the shape was changing in small ways, not in sync with the wind. Almost like something behind the cloud was affecting it. I opened the front door and stepped outside. The air felt colder than I expected. Still, no wind. I walked a few steps onto the driveway and looked up again. From outside, it was clearer. The blue glow was definitely coming from within the cloud, not from the ground, and it wasn't uniform. There were faint variations inside it, like darker and lighter patches moving slowly, not fast enough to be flashing, just shifting. I stood there for a couple of minutes, the I Ching trying to make sense of it. Then I heard something. At first I thought it was just the usual ringing you get in your ears when it's too quiet, but it changed. It turned into a low, steady tone. Not loud, but present. It didn't sound like it was coming from any direction. More like it was just there, the same way the silence had been earlier. I turned around, half expecting to see someone else outside, maybe a neighbor checking the outage. No one. All the houses were dark. No movement. I looked back up at the cloud. The blue seemed slightly brighter now, or maybe my eyes had adjusted. Either way, it was more noticeable, and the shifting inside it had become more defined. For a second, I thought I could make out a kind of pattern. Not shapes exactly, just areas that seemed to move together, like they were part of something larger. The tone in the air got a bit stronger, still not loud, just enough that I couldn't ignore it. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The time hadn't changed. It still read 11:02. That didn't make sense. I'd been standing there longer than a couple of minutes. I locked the screen and unlocked it again, thinking it might have frozen. Same time. I tapped the screen a few times, but nothing updated. When I looked back up, the blue patch had shifted slightly. Not across the sky, but in shape. It looked more stretched now, like something inside it had moved. The rest of the clouds kept drifting past it. I had this strong feeling that I shouldn't be standing out there. Not panic, just a quiet certainty. But I didn't go back inside. I stayed where I was, watching. The tone in the air started to fluctuate slightly, rising and falling in a way that felt almost rhythmic. The blue glow dimmed for a second, then brightened again. And for a brief moment, the cloud looked thinner, like I could almost see through it. I didn't see anything clearly, but I had the impression of something behind it. Not a shape I could describe, just something that didn't match the sky. Then the glow started to fade. Gradually this time, the blue softened, losing its color until it just looked like a normal patch of cloud. The tone in the air dropped off with it, fading into nothing. And right as the last hint of blue disappeared, the streetlights came back on, all at once. Porch lights flicked on across the street. I heard a few appliances in my house kick back to life. The normal background noise returned, like everything had been unpaused. I looked down at my phone, 11:03. Just 1 minute had passed. I stood there for a bit longer, looking at the sky. The clouds were moving normally now. No blue glow, no strange stillness. Everything looked exactly like it should. I went back inside and shut the door. The house felt warmer again. I checked the microwave. The clock was flashing, like it does after a power cut. I reset it and stood there for a second, listening to the normal sounds. Fridge humming, pipes ticking, all the usual stuff. Later that night, I tried to look up if anyone else had seen anything. By then, my phone signal was back. There were reports of the outage in the area. Nothing about the sky. I still go outside sometimes when the power cuts, just out of habit now. But I haven't seen that blue glow again. The clouds just look like clouds, and the sky stays the same. I was driving back from a late shift, maybe just after 2 a.m., on this long stretch of road that cuts through open farmland. No houses for miles, just fields on both sides and the occasional gate or tractor track. It had been raining earlier, not heavy, but enough to leave everything damp. The road still had that dark, reflective sheen to it, and every now and then, I'd hit shallow patches of water that made a soft hiss under the tires. I had the heater on low, radio barely audible, just enough to fill the silence. I remember feeling tired, but not dangerously so. Just ready to be home. The sky was clear by then. No clouds, just a few stars visible between patches of thin haze. It wasn't pitch black, but there wasn't much light either. My headlights were doing most of the work. About 10 minutes into that stretch, I noticed something odd, but I didn't react to it right away. It was just a reflection. At first, I thought it was water droplets on the inside of the windshield catching the light weirdly. A, a faint, quick flicker above the beam of the headlights. I blinked a couple of times and adjusted my posture, thinking maybe my eyes were just tired. Then it happened again. A quick glint high above the road, not in front of me exactly, more like above the point where the headlights reached, somewhere in the air where there shouldn't have been anything to reflect off. I slowed down slightly and leaned forward, trying to see better. The road ahead was empty, no signs, no overhead cables, no branches hanging over. It's a really open stretch, flat land, nothing tall enough to be above the road like that. I drove another few seconds, watching. Nothing. Then it flashed again. This time I caught it properly. A small, sharp reflection like light hitting metal. Not a soft glow, more like a quick, clean glint, the kind you get off a polished surface, and it wasn't stationary. It shifted slightly, just a small tilt, like something adjusting its angle. I instinctively slowed down more, maybe down to 30. My headlights stayed fixed on the road, but whatever that thing was, it kept catching the light at the edge of the beam. I couldn't see the object itself clearly, just the reflections. But I could tell it was up there, higher than a sign would be, higher than anything I'd normally expect on that road. I rolled the window down a bit, even though it was cold, just to listen. Nothing. No drone noise, no wind movement, nothing mechanical, just the faint sound of the car and the tires on wet pavement. I kept driving, eyes flicking between the road and that spot above. The reflection happened again, but longer this time, and for a second I could make out a shape. It wasn't detailed, more like an outline against the darker sky, something smooth, slightly curved. It didn't look like a drone, too big, and it wasn't blinking or making any noise. It didn't look like a bird either. It wasn't moving like one. It just hung there. Then it tilted. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like the entire shape rotated slightly, just enough for my headlights to catch it fully for a split second. It looked metallic, not shiny like chrome, more like brushed metal. Dull, but still reflective. The shape was wrong, though. Not a perfect circle, not square. Kind of stretched, like an oval but flattened in places. Smooth edges, no visible parts or seams. And then it moved. Not gradually. It didn't drift or glide. It shot straight upward. No build-up, no acceleration I could track. 1 second it was there, the next it was just gone. Straight up into the sky. I actually flinched, like my body reacted before my brain did. I hit the brakes harder than I meant to and slowed down almost to a stop in the middle of the road. I just sat there, staring up through the windshield. Nothing, just empty sky. No trail, no sound, no sign anything had been there at all. My heart was racing more than it should have been for what I'd just seen. I told myself it had to be something normal. A drone maybe, even though I hadn't heard anything, or some kind of reflection from something else that I'd misjudged. But the way it moved didn't match anything I knew. I stayed there for maybe 30 seconds, engine idling, trying to see if it would come back. It didn't. Eventually, I started driving again, slower this time. I kept checking the sky, even though I knew I probably wouldn't see it again. The road felt different after that. Not physically, just off, like the space around me was bigger than it should have been. Every now and then I thought I saw another flicker, but when I focused on it, there was nothing there. A couple of minutes later, something else happened. My radio cut out, not completely. It didn't switch off, but the sound dropped into static, like I'd driven out of range. That's not unusual in some areas, but I'd never had it happen on that stretch before. I reached over and adjusted the dial slightly, thinking maybe it was just a weak signal. For a second, the music came back. Then it warped. Not distorted like bad reception, but slowed down slightly, like the pitch dropped for half a second before snapping back. Then it went to static again. I turned it off. The silence felt heavier than before. I checked my mirrors. Still nothing behind me. No cars, no lights, just the dark road stretching back into nothing. I kept driving, trying to focus on the lines and not think about what I'd seen. Then I noticed the time. I'd glanced at it maybe 5 minutes before all that happened. But now, according to the clock on my dashboard, nearly 20 minutes had passed. That didn't line up. I hadn't stopped that long. Even sitting there after it shot upward, it couldn't have been more than a minute. I tried to think if I'd zoned out or something, but I didn't remember losing focus or drifting. The road ahead looked the same as it always did. Same landmarks, same turns, but the timing didn't match. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. Nothing else happened. No more reflections, no sounds, nothing unusual. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a bit before getting out. I checked the sky one more time. Clear. Still. Empty. The next day, I drove that same road in the afternoon. Bright daylight. There's nothing above it. No cables, no structures, nothing tall enough to be where that thing had been, just open sky. I even pulled over at the spot where I thought I'd seen it and stood outside the car, looking up. It felt normal. But I kept thinking about that reflection. The way it only showed when the angle was right, like it was just outside what I was supposed to see, and how it didn't move like anything I recognized, just tilted once, then gone. I noticed it through the floor before I heard anything. I was in the kitchen, just standing there waiting for the kettle to boil. It was late, close to midnight, and the house was quiet in that normal way. Fridge humming, pipes clicking now and then, nothing unusual. Then the floor shifted, not enough to move anything, just a low, steady vibration that came up through my feet. I froze. At first, I thought it was a lorry passing on the road behind the houses. You feel that sometimes a faint rumble through the ground before you hear it, but there was no sound, just the vibration. I looked down at the tiles like I expected to see something. The vibration stayed constant, low, even. I walked slowly toward the hallway. Each step I could feel it through the soles of my feet, not shaking, just present, like something heavy was moving somewhere above. That thought hit me before I really processed it. Above. I stopped in the doorway and listened. That's when I heard it. Not a noise exactly, more like a pressure in the air. A deep, low hum, but so quiet it almost wasn't audible. I could feel it more than hear it. In my chest, in my ears. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The vibration in the floor increased slightly, still steady, still even. I looked up at the ceiling without thinking. Nothing there. Just the same light fixture, the same faint shadows. But the feeling stayed, like something was directly overhead. Moving slowly. I stepped into the living room. The vibration carried through the carpet. Same intensity, same rhythm. The hum grew slightly stronger, still barely audible, but now I could pick it out. A deep tone, constant, not rising or falling. I walked toward the front door. Each step, the pressure in my ears increased. I could feel it in my jaw now, a dull, tight feeling. I paused with my hand on the handle. The vibration peaked, stronger than before, but still controlled. Still steady. I opened the door. The moment I did, everything stopped. Completely. No fade, no transition. Just gone. The vibration disappeared. The hum vanished. The pressure in my ears dropped instantly. The air outside felt normal. Cold. Still. Quiet. I stepped onto the front step and looked up. The sky was clear. A few clouds off in the distance. Stars visible. Nothing unusual. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting. Nothing came back. No vibration. No sound. Just normal night. I stepped further out onto the driveway, looked around. The street was empty. No cars, no lights in windows, everything still. I looked back at the house. Nothing seemed out of place. No movement, no signs of anything. I stepped back inside, closed the door. The moment it shut, I expected the vibration to return. It didn't. The house was quiet, normal quiet. The fridge hummed, pipes clicked, everything exactly as it should be. I stood there for a minute trying to make sense of it. Then I checked the time. 12:47. That didn't feel right. I'd come into the kitchen just after midnight. There was no way it had been that long. I went back into the living room and sat down, tried to listen for anything unusual. Nothing. Everything felt grounded again. I stayed up for a while after that. Didn't feel like going straight to bed. Eventually, I did. But I kept noticing something. Every time the house made a normal sound, a pipe, a creak, I'd pause, listening, expecting that vibration to come back. It didn't. The next day I asked my neighbor Claire if she'd noticed anything overnight. She just shook her head. Nothing. Why? I told her I thought I'd felt something through the floor. She laughed it off. Probably just a lorry, she said, but I didn't hear one, and it didn't feel like one. That night I stayed up again, around the same time, just waiting. Nothing happened. No vibration, no sound, everything normal. But now, every now and then when I'm standing still in the house, I notice it. That faint expectation, like something is about to pass overhead again. Heavy, slow, and completely silent. I noticed it because the silence felt wrong. Not quiet, wrong. I'd gone out camping on my own, a spot I'd used a few times before. It was about an hour's walk from the nearest road, deep enough into the woods that you don't hear cars or people, just the usual forest noise. That night had been normal. Fire going, small one. I'd eaten, packed things away, and sat there for a while just listening. Wind moving through the trees, occasional rustling from something small in the undergrowth, the steady background of insects. Nothing unusual. I turned in around midnight, zipped up the tent, lay down, and left the flaps slightly open so I could see a bit of the fire dying down. I must have dozed off. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I woke up suddenly. No noise. Just awake. At first I thought I'd heard something, but then I realized it was the opposite. There was nothing. No wind, no insects, no movement. Complete silence. It felt like someone had muted everything. I stayed still, listening. The kind of silence where your ears start to strain, like they're trying to pick up something that isn't there. I sat up slowly inside the tent. The air felt heavy. Not physically thick, just still, like it wasn't moving at all. I reached over and unzipped the flap the rest of the way. The fire outside had burned down to embers, just a faint red glow. Enough to make out shapes. The trees stood still, no movement in the branches, no leaves shifting. I stepped out of the tent. The ground felt colder than it should have. I stood there, looking around. The silence pressed in. Even my own breathing sounded too loud. That's when I felt it. A slight pressure in my ears, like a change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I took a few steps away from the tent, turning slowly. Everything looked normal. Same trees, same clearing, but it didn't feel normal. It felt like something had changed just enough that I couldn't place it. I looked deeper into the trees. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, a faint shimmer, not a light. More like the air itself was moving in a way it shouldn't. It was between two trees, maybe 15 or 20 feet away. I stared at it, trying to focus. The shimmer shifted, slowly, not like wind, more controlled, like it was moving with intention. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I could feel it in my jaw now. I didn't move, just watched. The shimmer slid between the trees. Still faint, still hard to define, but definitely there. It wasn't reflecting light. It wasn't casting light. It was just distorting what was behind it, like heat rising off pavement, but cleaner, more precise. I took a small step backward. The moment I did, the shimmer stopped, held in place. Then it shifted slightly, not toward me, just adjusting. The pressure in my ears increased again. Sharper. I stayed still. The shimmer moved again, slowly drifting further into the trees. Then it paused. For a second, I thought I saw something within it. Not a shape, more like a darker area moving inside the distortion. Then it was gone. The shimmer thinned, faded slightly, then moved again, further away. The silence around me stayed absolute, no sound at all. I took another step back toward the tent. The pressure eased slightly. The shimmer continued moving, now deeper into the trees, becoming harder to see. Then it stopped one last time, held there, and then it dissolved, not fading evenly, just breaking apart into nothing. The trees behind it looked normal again, no distortion, no movement. The moment it disappeared, the sound came back, all at once. Wind in the trees, insects, distant rustling. The pressure in my ears dropped instantly. I stood there for a few seconds, just listening. Everything sounded normal again, too normal, like nothing had happened. I looked back at the spot where I'd seen it. Nothing, just trees. I went back to the tent slowly, zipped it up, lay down, but I didn't sleep. I just lay there listening to the normal sounds, waiting for them to stop again. They didn't. When it finally got light, everything looked exactly the same. No marks, no disturbance, nothing out of place. I packed up and left earlier than I planned. Didn't stay for breakfast. When I checked the time on my phone back at the car, it was later than I expected, by at least an hour. I stood there for a minute, trying to think it through. It didn't add up. I haven't been back to that spot since. But sometimes late at night, when everything goes quiet for a second, I notice it. That brief drop in sound. And I catch myself listening a little too closely, waiting to see if it all disappears again. I noticed it because the water wasn't supposed to move like that. I'd gone out late, down to a small stretch of river I'd been visiting for years. It sits just past a line of trees, tucked away enough that you don't get many people, especially at night. It was quiet when I got there. No wind, no insects. Just the slow, steady sound of water moving over rocks. I set up near the bank, same spot I always used. Cast out, settled in, and just waited. The surface of the river was almost flat. You could see faint reflections of the sky where it widened out a bit, but mostly it was dark. I'd been there maybe half an hour when I saw it. At first I thought it was a reflection. A thin line of light just under the surface. Faint. Barely visible. Running straight across the water from one side of the river to the other. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. It didn't ripple. Didn't break up. Just a clean, straight line beneath the surface. I thought maybe it was something catching light from the sky, but there wasn't enough light for that. The sky was clear, but dim. Nothing bright enough to reflect like that. I shifted my position. The line didn't move with me. It stayed in place, perfectly straight. Then it moved, not drifting, not flowing with the current. It traveled sideways, in a straight line, smooth and even, like it was being guided. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then, subtle, like a change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I kept my eyes on the water. The line continued moving. Still perfectly straight, still just under the surface. It didn't disturb the water. No ripples, no wake, nothing. Just that faint glow sliding across. I stood up slowly. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I could feel it in my jaw. I stepped closer to the edge of the bank. The line kept moving. It reached the far side of the river and stopped. Just held there for a second. Then it faded, not quickly, just dimming until it was gone. The water looked normal again, dark, still. I stood there staring at the spot where it had been. Nothing. No movement, no light. I waited. A minute passed, then another. I started to relax slightly. Told myself it had to be something natural, some kind of reflection. But then it came back, this time further upstream. Same faint line, same depth under the surface. It moved again, same motion. Perfectly straight, same speed. I felt the pressure in my ears increase again. Sharper now. I stepped back slightly. The line didn't change. Still moving, still smooth. It reached the middle of the river, and for a second I thought I saw something above it. Not in the water. Above it, like the air just above the surface was slightly distorted. Then it was gone. The line continued, reached the near side and stopped. Then faded. The pressure in my ears peaked. I winced slightly. I stepped back further from the bank. The pressure eased a little. The water stayed dark. Still, I stood there not moving. The silence around me felt heavier now, too complete. No insects, no distant sounds. Just the water. Then the line appeared again, closer this time, almost directly in front of me. It didn't start from one side. It just formed, a straight segment under the surface. I froze. The pressure in my ears returned immediately, stronger. I could feel it behind my eyes now. The line didn't move at first, just sat there, perfectly straight. Then it shifted, not sideways, toward me, still straight, still smooth. I stepped back instinctively. The moment I did, the line stopped, held position. Then it moved sideways again, away from me, same speed as before. The pressure eased slightly. I kept stepping back. The line continued moving, reaching the far side again, then fading. The silence broke, all at once, a faint breeze through the trees, distant sounds returning. The pressure in my ears dropped completely. I stood there for a minute, staring at the water. Nothing else happened. The surface stayed dark, normal. I packed up slowly. Didn't rush, but I didn't stay either. As I walked back through the trees, I kept listening. Everything sounded normal again. When I got to my car, I checked the time, 2:27. That didn't make sense. I'd arrived just after midnight. There was no way it had been that long. I sat in the car for a minute before starting it. The silence felt different now, not heavy, just normal. I drove home without stopping. The next night, I went back. Same spot, same time. The water looked normal. No light, no movement. But now, when I stand at the edge of the bank and look down, there's always that moment where I expect to see it again. That thin line, moving in a way water shouldn't. I noticed it because the timestamp jumped. I wasn't even looking for anything unusual. I'd just woken up, made coffee, and opened the camera app out of habit. I check it most mornings just to make sure nothing's been messed with. overnight. The front camera had one notification: motion detected at 3:12. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes it picks up headlights from a passing car or someone walking by late. I tapped it. The clip started normally. Front garden, driveway, the street beyond. Everything still. The usual grainy night image. No movement. I watched for a few seconds, then there was a flicker. Not a full white flash, more like the brightness shifted unevenly across the frame, like something had passed in front of the lens for a split second. Then the video skipped. The timestamp jumped from 03:12:7 to 3:15. 8 seconds gone. The image resumed. Nothing there. Just the same empty driveway. I replayed it. Same thing. Normal footage, then that brief flicker, then the skip, no motion before, no motion after. I frowned and pulled up the back camera. Same time, same event. I opened that clip. It was worse. The image distorted more heavily before the skip. Blocks of pixels, slight tearing across the frame, like the signal had been pulled sideways. Then it cut. When it came back, the timestamp had jumped the same 8 seconds, and again, nothing in the frame. No movement. No object. Just the garden. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. Cameras glitch sometimes, but both at once, at the exact same time. I went back to the front clip and paused it just before the flicker. Zoomed in. There was nothing obvious, no shape, no light source, just the normal image. I stepped frame by frame. The flicker wasn't a full frame event. It started at the top, a faint brightness shift that moved downward, but not like light, more like the image itself was being disturbed. Then it cut. I checked the system logs. No errors, no disconnect, no signal loss. Everything showed as normal operation. I stood up and looked out the front window. Daylight now. Everything looked exactly as it should, nothing out of place. I went outside, walked the driveway, looked up at the camera. It was mounted just under the roofline, angled down. Nothing around it. No wires disturbed. No signs of anything. I walked to the edge of the street and looked back at the house. Tried to picture what the camera would have seen. There was nothing there. No object, no source of light. Just open space. That night, I checked the system again before bed. Everything working fine. No glitches. I left the app open on my phone for a bit while I sat in the living room. The live feed looked normal, clear, stable. I turned the lights off and sat there in the dark for a while, watching the front camera. Nothing happened. Eventually, I went to bed. I don't remember falling asleep. The next thing I remember is waking up. Not to a sound, just awake. I lay there for a second trying to figure out why. The room was completely quiet, too quiet. I checked the time, 03:11. I stared at the screen. That was the same time as the clip. I stayed still, listening. Nothing. Then I felt it, a slight pressure in my ears, like a change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I sat up slowly. The pressure increased slightly. I could feel it in my jaw. I looked toward the window. Curtains closed, no light coming through. I got out of bed and walked into the hallway. The house felt still, not just quiet, like the air wasn't moving. I went downstairs. The living room was dark. I could see the faint outline of the furniture. I picked up my phone and opened the camera app. Live feed, front camera. Everything looked normal. Empty driveway, still street. Then the image flickered. Exactly the same way as before. Top of the frame first, then spreading downward. I felt the pressure spike, sharp enough to make me wince. I stared at the screen. The image didn't skip this time. It just distorted. For a second, the frame looked stretched, like it had depth it shouldn't have. Then it snapped back. Normal. I looked up from the phone. The room was still. Silent. The pressure eased slightly. I looked back at the screen. The image was stable again. Nothing there. I stood there for a minute, not moving. Then I turned the screen off. The moment I did, the pressure dropped completely. The house felt normal again. I went back upstairs, checked the time. It was 3:19. That didn't make sense. I'd only been downstairs for a few minutes. In the morning, I checked the recordings again. There was a new clip, 12. I opened it. Same pattern. Flicker. Distortion. Skip. 8 seconds missing. Nothing visible before or after. I watched it a few times. Then, I paused just before the flicker. Zoomed in. For a single frame, right at the top edge of the image, there was something. Not a clear shape, just a slight darkening, like something had been there, just out of view. Then the flicker started. I sat there for a while looking at that frame. The rest of the day, everything felt normal. But now, every time I checked the cameras late at night, There's always that moment where I expect it, that brief flicker, those missing seconds, like something passed through the frame without ever actually appearing. I noticed it because the pattern didn't match anymore. I was lying on my back in the garden just outside my sister's place in Northumberland. She lives far enough out that you actually get a proper sky at night, not the washed out version you see in town. It was cold, clear, and still. No wind, no clouds. The kind of night where the stars feel close. I'd been out there maybe 20 minutes, just staring up, letting my eyes adjust. You start picking out the same shapes after a while, even if you don't know the names. There was this small cluster slightly above and to the right of where I was looking. Nothing special about it. Just a tight grouping, easy to recognize. I'd been glancing back to it every so often without really thinking about it. Then, at one point, it didn't look right. I frowned slightly, trying to place what had changed. It wasn't obvious at first. The stars were still there. Same brightness, same number. But the spacing felt off, like one of them had shifted slightly. I stared at it, trying to line it up with how I remembered it. Then it happened again. Not a star moving on its own. The whole cluster shifted, just slightly, like something had passed behind them, nudging their positions. It wasn't fast, more like a subtle slide. Then it stopped. I sat up a little, propping myself on my elbows. The rest of the sky was still. Only that cluster had changed. I blinked a couple times. The stars returned to their original positions, exactly where they'd been before. Like nothing had happened. I lay back again, trying to stay still. Focused on that same area. For a few seconds, everything looked normal. Then I felt it. A slight pressure in my ears. Not painful, just enough to notice. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I kept my eyes fixed on the cluster. It stayed steady. Then, again, it shifted. Same movement. A slight drift. All the stars in that small group moving together, just a fraction, like something unseen had passed through them. I felt my chest tighten. I sat up properly this time. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I could feel it in my jaw. I didn't take my eyes off the sky. The cluster held its new position for a second. Then it snapped back. Instantly. No transition, just back to normal. I looked around at the rest of the sky. Everything else was unchanged. Stars steady, no movement, no light, nothing. I looked back at the cluster. Still normal. I stayed there, watching it. After a few seconds, I noticed something else. The air had gone completely still. Not just calm. Still. No movement at all. The usual distant sounds had dropped out too. No cars, no wind, nothing, just silence. I shifted slightly on the ground. The sound of my jacket against the grass felt too loud, too isolated. I looked back at the cluster. This time, when it shifted, I saw something with it, not clearly. More like the space around the stars distorted, like a faint ripple. It moved through the cluster, and as it did, the stars shifted again, then returned. I held my breath without realizing it. The pressure in my ears increased, sharper now. I swallowed hard. It didn't go away. I tried to focus on the ripple, but it wasn't consistent. It appeared for a second, then gone, then there again. Each time the stars moved slightly, then snapped back. I felt that tightness in my chest build. I pushed myself up to a sitting position. The moment I did, the cluster stopped moving, completely. Everything looked normal again. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. I stayed still, watching. Nothing happened. Then, slowly, the stars in that cluster dimmed. Not all of them, just slightly, like they were further away. The rest of the sky stayed the same, only that small group. I leaned forward slightly. The pressure returned. The stars brightened again, back to normal. I leaned back. They dimmed slightly. I froze, didn't move. The stars held steady. The pressure in my ears peaked, sharp enough to make me wince. And then it stopped, all at once. The pressure dropped. The silence broke. I could hear the faint rustle of trees again. A distant car somewhere far off. Normal sounds. The cluster stayed still. No more shifting, no dimming. Just normal. I sat there for a minute, staring at it. Nothing else happened. I lay back down slowly. Kept watching. Everything stayed the same. Eventually, I went back inside. Checked the time on my phone, 12:58. That didn't make sense. I'd gone out just after 11:30. There was no way it had been that long. I stood there in the kitchen for a bit, trying to work it out. It didn't add up. The next night, I went back out again. Same spot, same time, looked at the same part of the sky. The cluster was there. exactly where it should be. I watched it for almost an hour. Nothing happened, but every now and then when I blinked, there was a moment where it looked slightly off, like the spacing wasn't quite right. Then it would snap back, and I couldn't tell if it had actually moved or if I was just expecting it to. I noticed it because the alarm didn't sound like it was next to me. It was muffled, distant, like it was coming from the other side of the room. I was still half asleep when I reached out for the nightstand. My hand hit nothing. I opened my eyes properly and listened. The alarm was still going, that same tone I use every morning, but it sounded wrong, quieter than it should have been. I pushed myself up onto one elbow and looked toward the floor. My phone was there, face up, about 6 feet away near the wall opposite the bed. Still buzzing. I just stared at it for a second. I knew I'd left it on the nightstand. I always do. Same spot right next to the lamp. I got out of bed and walked over, the sound getting clearer with each step. Picked it up and silenced the alarm. The screen stayed on for a second, battery at 3%. That didn't make sense either. I'd plugged it in before I went to sleep. I remember doing it. Even checked the cable because it had been loose the night before. I looked back at the nightstand. The charger was still there, cable hanging off the edge, not plugged into the phone. I stood there for a moment, trying to work it out. Maybe I'd knocked it off in my sleep, but it wasn't near the bed. It was across the room, and it hadn't landed face down or sideways. It was flat, screen up, like it had been placed there. I checked the time, 6:42. The alarm was set for 6:30. That meant it had been going for over 10 minutes. I don't sleep through alarms. I went to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Morning light came in, normal, nothing unusual. Everything outside looked fine. I turned back to the room. Nothing looked disturbed, no signs of anything falling or being moved. I walked back to the bed and sat down. The air felt slightly off. Not cold, just still, like nothing had moved in a while. I looked at the phone again. 3%. I plugged it back in. The charging icon appeared normally. No issues. I opened the battery usage. The graph showed a steady drop through the night, like it had been in use. That didn't line up. I hadn't used it after going to bed. I checked the app usage. The camera had been open multiple times between 2:11 and 2:24. I frowned. I didn't remember waking up at all. I opened the camera roll. There were photos, not many, maybe 6 or 7, all taken within that time window. I opened the first one. It was dark, almost completely black, just a faint outline of the room. I zoomed in. The angle was wrong. It wasn't from the nightstand. It was lower, closer to the floor. I opened the next one. Same thing, dark, but this time the camera was pointed upward, at the ceiling. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then, subtle. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I scrolled through the rest. Each photo was taken from a slightly different position. Closer to the door, closer to the wall, always low, always angled upward or across the room. In one of them, I could see part of the bed, a dark shape where I'd been lying. I zoomed in. Nothing clear, just a blur. But the angle didn't make sense. It wasn't taken from the bed. I checked the timestamps again. They were all within that 13-minute window. I went back to the battery graph. The drop was consistent with the camera being active. I sat there, trying to piece it together. Then I noticed something else. The last photo. I opened it. It was darker than the others, almost completely black. But in the center of the frame, there was a faint light. Not bright, just a soft, dim glow. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It didn't illuminate anything, just existed. I zoomed in. For a second, it looked like it had shape. Not clear. More like the space around it was slightly off. Then it was gone. Just pixels. I put the phone down slowly. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I looked around the room again. Everything looked normal, exactly how I'd left it. I stood up and walked over to where the phone had been. The floor felt normal. Nothing out of place. I crouched down, looking at the spot. Nothing. No marks. No signs of anything. I stood back up. The pressure eased slightly. I went back to the bed and sat down. Tried to think it through. Sleepwalking. Maybe. But I don't sleepwalk. And even if I did, why would I be taking photos from the floor? I looked at the phone again. The battery had climbed to 5%. Charging normally. I checked the time. 6:49. That didn't feel right. It felt like I'd been sitting there longer. I stood up and went to the window again. Looked outside. Everything normal. Cars passing, people starting their day. I turned back to the room. For a second, I had the feeling that if I looked at the floor where the phone had been long enough, I might see something again. Not the light, just something out of place. I didn't test it. I picked up the phone and left the room. But now, every night before I go to sleep, I make sure the phone is on the nightstand. Plugged in, screen facing down, and when I wake up, there's always that moment before I look over, where I expect it not to be there anymore. I noticed it because it matched my pace. I was walking back from a late shift, taking the longer route home through a quiet stretch of road that runs past a small park and a row of houses that thin out into open ground. It was just after 1 a.m., cold, dry, no wind, the kind of night where your footsteps sound louder than usual. I had my hands in my pockets, just walking at a steady pace, not really thinking about anything. That's when I heard it, a low hum. At first, I thought it was something distant, maybe a generator or some kind of machinery running somewhere far off. It wasn't loud, just a steady low tone, easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. I kept walking. After a few steps, I realized something felt off. The hum didn't fade, didn't get quieter or louder. It stayed exactly the same. I slowed down slightly. The hum stayed with me, same level, same tone. I stopped walking. The hum stopped instantly, not faded, not tapered off, just gone. I stood there listening. Nothing. No hum. Just the normal night sounds. Faint, distant traffic. A slight rustle from somewhere in the dark. I took a step forward. The hum came back, exactly the same as before, same pitch, same volume, like it had been switched on. I stopped again. Silence. My chest tightened slightly. I looked around. The street was empty. No cars, no lights in windows, nothing that could be making that kind of sound. I looked up. The sky was clear. A few stars visible between the rooftops. Nothing unusual. I started walking again, slower this time. The hum followed. Perfectly matched to me. It didn't echo, didn't shift direction. It just felt like it was directly above. I tested it, took a few quick steps. The hum kept up. Same tone, no change. I stopped suddenly. It cut off. I stood there for a second, breathing slowly. Then I started walking again. The hum came back. I could feel something else now. A slight pressure in my ears. Not strong, just enough to notice. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I kept walking. The hum stayed, steady, constant. I tried changing direction, stepped off the pavement and onto the grass by the side of the road. The hum followed. No change. Still overhead. I stepped back onto the pavement. Same thing. I stopped again. Silence. Completely gone. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. I stood there for a few seconds. Then I took one slow step forward. The hum returned. Instant. The pressure came back with it. I felt it in my jaw now. A dull tightness. I looked up again. This time I noticed something. Not a light, not exactly. More like a faint patch in the sky. Slightly darker than the rest. Hard to see unless you focused. It stayed directly above me. I moved a step to the left. The patch shifted. Not smoothly, it just adjusted. Still above me. My stomach dropped slightly. I stopped walking. The hum stopped. The patch held its position for a second. Then it shifted slightly away. Not far, just enough that it wasn't directly overhead anymore. I took a step forward. The hum came back. The patch adjusted again. Back above me. The pressure in my ears increased. I could feel it behind my eyes now. I stood still. The hum stopped. The pressure eased. The patch drifted slightly away again. That's when I realized it wasn't reacting instantly. There was a delay, small but there. I took another step forward. The hum returned. The patch followed after a second. I stopped. Silence. The patch drifted again. I tested it a few more times, each time the same pattern. Move, hum, stop, silence. Look up, patch adjusts. My chest tightened more. The street felt too quiet, too empty. I started walking faster. The hum kept up, same tone, same level. The pressure increased slightly. I turned the corner toward my street. The houses got closer together, more enclosed. The hum didn't change, still overhead. I picked up my pace. The hum matched it perfectly. No lag. I reached my front gate, stopped. The hum cut off instantly. The pressure dropped. I stood there for a second, hand on the latch. Looked up. The patch was still there, but further away now, not directly above. I opened the gate and stepped inside. The moment I did, the patch shifted, not following, just moving away. I closed the gate behind me. The sky above my house looked normal. No patch, no distortion. I stood there for a minute, listening. No hum, no pressure. Everything felt normal again. I went inside and closed the door. The house felt loud, fridge humming, pipes creaking, all the usual sounds. I checked the time, 1:49. That didn't make sense. I'd left work just after 1. The walk shouldn't have taken that long. I stood there in the hallway trying to piece it together. It didn't add up. The next night, I took the same route again. Same time, same street. No hum, no pressure, nothing unusual. But every now and then, when I'm walking alone at night, I slow down just to see if something starts matching my steps again, and sometimes for a second, I think I can hear it. I noticed it because I thought it was a car passing outside. I was lying on my back, not fully asleep yet, just drifting. The room was dark, curtains closed, no light getting in from the street. I'd checked the time not long before, around 1:05. At some point, I became aware of a faint light. Not bright, just a soft glow spreading across the ceiling. At first, I didn't think much of it. Cars pass sometimes, and their headlights can move across the room if the angle's right. But this wasn't moving like that. It wasn't sweeping across. It was forming. A circular patch right above me. I kept my eyes half closed, watching it without fully waking up. The glow was dim, almost gray-blue, with soft edges. It didn't cast light onto anything else. The walls stayed dark. The rest of the ceiling stayed dark, just that circle. I opened my eyes properly. The room didn't change. The glow stayed. I blinked a couple times trying to focus. It didn't flicker, didn't shift, just held there. That's when I felt something in my ears, a slight pressure, not painful, just enough to notice. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I pushed myself onto my elbows. The glow didn't react, still centered above me, still perfectly circular. I glanced toward the window. Curtains closed, no light coming through. I looked back at the ceiling. The glow was still there, unchanged. I sat up fully. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I could feel it in my jaw now. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The moment my feet hit the floor, the glow changed. Not dramatically, just slightly smaller. I froze, stared at it. It didn't move across the ceiling. It just contracted, very slowly. I took a step back. The glow shrank a little more. My chest tightened. I stopped moving. The glow held its size. The pressure in my ears stayed steady. I took a step forward. The glow expanded slightly, not back to its original size, just a little. I stepped back again. It shrank. That's when it started to feel wrong. I stood there, testing it. One step forward, it expanded. One step back, it contracted. Not instantly. There was a delay, small but noticeable, like it was reacting, but not in real time. I looked around the room quickly. Everything else was normal. Nothing casting light, nothing moving. I looked back at the ceiling. The glow had started shrinking on its own now, slowly, even though I wasn't moving. The edges stayed soft, but the circle was getting tighter. The pressure in my ears increased again, sharper this time. I winced slightly. I stepped back toward the wall. The glow continued to shrink. Now about half the size it had been, I could feel something in my chest now. Not a vibration, more like a pressure, like the air was slightly heavier. I kept my eyes on it. The circle tightened further. And for a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not a shape, more like a darker area shifting within the light. I blinked. It was gone. The glow shrank again. Now just a small disc. The pressure in my ears peaked. I swallowed hard. It didn't clear. I stepped back again until I felt the wall behind me. The glow didn't react this time. It kept shrinking. Now it was just a small point of light, perfectly centered, perfectly still. Then it dimmed, not fading outward, just losing intensity. And then it was gone. Completely. The ceiling was dark again. The pressure in my ears dropped instantly. The room felt normal. The air moved slightly. I could hear faint sounds from outside again. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the empty ceiling. Nothing. No marks. No change. I walked over to the light switch and turned it on. The room filled with normal light. Everything looked exactly as it should. I turned it off again. Darkness returned. Nothing unusual. I went back to bed slowly, lay down, stared at the ceiling for a while. Nothing came back. I checked my phone. 1:32. That didn't make sense. I'd only been lying there for a few minutes before noticing the glow. It couldn't have been that long. I lay there for a while longer, trying to think it through. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, everything felt normal. The ceiling looked the same. No marks, no discoloration, nothing. But now, when I lie in bed at night and look up, There's always that moment where I expect it. That faint circle forming above me, waiting to close in again. I noticed it because the sky didn't look right anymore. I'd been driving for a while, heading back from visiting a friend out past the moors. It was late, close to 1 a.m., and I'd taken a quieter route to avoid the main roads. Long stretches with nothing but fields and the occasional cluster of trees. The sky had been clear when I started, really clear. Stars sharp enough that you could pick out patterns without trying. I remember glancing up at one point through the windshield, just noticing how clean it looked. Then a few minutes later, it changed. Not dramatically, just dulled. Like someone had put a thin layer over it. The stars were still there, but fainter, muted, as if they were behind something. I frowned slightly, leaning forward in my seat. At first, I thought it might be fog, but there was nothing in front of me. The road was clear, no mist, no haze, just the sky ahead looking washed out. I slowed down a little. The headlights cut across the road like normal. Nothing unusual on the ground, only the sky. It didn't spread across everything, only the area directly ahead. If I glanced to the side, the stars looked normal, bright, sharp. Then back ahead, they were dulled again. That's when I felt it. A slight pressure in my ears, like a shift in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I adjusted my grip on the wheel, trying to stay focused. The road was empty. No other cars. No lights in the distance. Just that washed out patch of sky in front of me. I slowed down more. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I could feel it in my jaw now. The sky ahead didn't flicker, didn't move. It just stayed that way, muted, like something was between me and it. I glanced down at the GPS. The route was still set. Same road, same direction. I looked back up. The washed out area had shifted slightly, not moving across the sky, just adjusting. Now more centered above the road. I felt that tightness in my chest start. I tapped the brakes and slowed to almost a crawl. The car felt quieter than it should have been. The engine sound muted slightly. Even the tires on the road seemed softer. I cracked the window. Nothing. No wind. No distant noise. Just silence. The pressure in my ears peaked. Sharp enough to make me wince. I swallowed again. Still nothing. I kept my eyes on the sky. For a second, I thought I saw something within that washed out area. Not a shape. More like the space there was slightly distorted, like it didn't line up properly with the rest of the sky. Then it was gone. The sky snapped back, all at once. The stars returned to normal brightness, sharp again, clear. The pressure in my ears dropped instantly. The sound came back. Engine, road, everything normal again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I sat there for a second, just letting everything settle. Then I looked down at the GPS again. The route had changed. I frowned. The map now showed a different path. Still heading home, but rerouted. A different road ahead. I didn't remember touching anything. No prompts, no recalculating message. Just changed. I tapped the screen. It responded normally. No alerts, no notifications. I checked the previous route. It wasn't there anymore. The system showed this new path as if it had always been the one. I looked up at the road ahead. It matched the new route, but I knew it hadn't before. I'd driven this way enough times. I knew where I should have been going. I sat there for a second, debating. Then I decided to follow it. Didn't feel like turning around. The road ahead was still empty, still quiet, but now everything felt slightly off, like the space around me didn't quite match what I expected. I drove on. The rest of the route was unfamiliar. Not completely different. Just not the one I'd planned. I didn't see anything else unusual. No lights, no movement. Everything looked normal. But the feeling didn't go away. When I finally got back into town, the streetlights came back. Other cars, normal noise. Everything felt grounded again. I pulled into my driveway and turned the engine off. Sat there for a minute. Checked the time. 2:19. That didn't make sense. I'd left just after 1. The drive shouldn't have taken that long. I checked the GPS history. It showed the route I'd just taken, no record of the original one. I scrolled back. Nothing. Like it had never been set. I sat there for a while trying to piece it together. It didn't add up. The next day I checked the route again. Tried to recreate the original one. It was there, exactly how I remembered. No issues. No changes. But now, when I drive at night and glance up at the sky, there's always that moment where I expect it. That thin, washed out patch. like something is sitting between me and everything else, just for a second, before it clears. I noticed it because the light came from the wrong place. I was up earlier than I needed to be. Couldn't sleep, so I went out onto the back deck with a mug of coffee just to sit in the quiet before the day started. It was one of those cold mornings where everything feels slightly damp, like the air hasn't fully decided what it's doing yet. The sky was still dark, but not fully night anymore. That dull, pre-dawn gray starting to creep in along the horizon. Or at least it should have been. I remember looking out over the fields behind the house, expecting that slow, even brightening you get before sunrise. Instead, I saw a line. At first, I thought it was something on my eyes. A thin vertical strip of light rising from the horizon straight upward into the sky, not wide. Maybe the width of a finger at arm's length. It was brighter than the rest of the sky, but not blinding. Just clearly different. I blinked a couple times. The line stayed. It didn't spread out like dawn normally does. It didn't glow across the horizon. It just sat there. A narrow column of light reaching up into the sky. I leaned forward slightly, squinting. The rest of the horizon stayed dark. No gradual brightening, just that one strip. I set my mug down without really thinking about it. Stood up. The air felt still. No wind, no distant sounds. Even the usual early morning birds weren't making noise. I stepped closer to the edge of the deck. The line of light didn't move, it didn't flicker, it didn't widen, it just held steady. That's when I noticed the edges. They were too clean. Not sharp like a beam, but defined enough that it didn't blend naturally with the sky around it, like it was separate. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, subtle at first. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I kept staring at it. The longer I looked, the more it felt like the sky around it wasn't lining up properly, like there was depth there that didn't match the rest. I took a step off the deck and onto the grass. The cold came through my shoes immediately. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I could feel it in my jaw. The line of light pulsed. Once, very faint, just a slight increase in brightness, then back to normal. I stood there, not moving. Then something changed. The light didn't spread outward. It started to retract, not downward, upward. The bottom edge of the line lifted from the horizon, slowly at first, then a little faster. It was like the light was being pulled back into the sky. The lower part faded as it moved up, leaving the horizon dark again. I felt that tightness in my chest start. The pressure in my ears increased again. I took a step back. The light continued to retract. Now it was only halfway up where it had been, still a vertical line, still narrow, still too defined. I took another step back. The pressure eased slightly. The light kept moving upward, the bottom edge rising, the top staying fixed. Then, just for a second, I thought I saw something at the top of it. Not a shape, more like the sky there, distorted, like the light was anchored to something I couldn't see properly. Then the line shortened further. Now just a small segment in the sky. I stood there, barely breathing. The pressure in my ears peaked, sharp enough to make me wince, and then it was gone. Not fading, not dimming, just gone. The sky snapped back to normal. The faint, even gray of early dawn spread across the horizon. The sounds came back. Birds, distant wind, everything at once. The pressure in my ears dropped instantly. I stood there for a minute, staring at the spot where the line had been. Nothing. Just normal sky. I picked up my mug with slightly shaky hands. The coffee had gone cold. I went back inside, checked the time on my phone. 5:12. That didn't make sense. I'd come outside just before 4:30. There was no way it had been that long. I stood in the kitchen for a while, trying to piece it together. It didn't add up. Later that day, I mentioned it to my neighbor, Liam. He just laughed it off. Probably just the sun coming up weird through the clouds, he said. But there hadn't been clouds, and the light hadn't come from the horizon the way it should. The next morning, I went out at the same time, same spot, watched the horizon. The sky brightened normally, slow, even, spreading across the whole line. Nothing unusual. But now, every morning, I catch myself looking for it. That thin vertical line. Waiting to see if the sky is going to open like that again. Just for a second before it pulls itself back together. I didn't think anything had happened until Darren mentioned it. He caught me out front while I was taking the bins out. Just a normal afternoon, nothing strange about it. He lives 2 houses down, older guy, always notices things you don't. Everything all right last night? He asked. I just shrugged. Yeah, why? He looked at my roof for a second before answering. Thought I saw something above your place. Late. Didn't look right. I laughed it off at first. Like what, a drone? He shook his head slowly. No, too still, too low. Just hovering there. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just had told him I'd check the cameras. I'd put in a basic security system a few months back. 2 cameras, one at the front, one at the back, both covering the driveway and garden. Nothing fancy, but they worked. I didn't remember hearing anything the night before. No noise, no lights, nothing. Still, I went inside and pulled up the app. There was a clip from around 2:17 a.m., motion detected. I didn't remember waking up at that time. I tapped it. The footage started normally. Front of the house, driveway empty, street quiet. Same dim streetlight glow in the distance. No movement. I watched for a few seconds. Then the image flickered. Not a full cut. Just a quick distortion like the signal had glitched. Then it happened again. Stronger. The entire frame shifted slightly, thus like it had been pulled sideways for a split second. Then it snapped back. I leaned closer to the screen. Right before the flicker, there was something at the top of the frame. Barely visible. Just a slight darkening against the sky. I replayed it. Same thing. A faint, uneven shape just above the roofline. Then the flicker. Then the image distorted again. This time, the frame broke. Blocks of pixels stretched and misaligned. Then it skipped. The timestamp jumped from 2:2 to 12 to 19. 7 seconds missing. The image resumed. Everything looked normal again. Empty driveway. Still street. I watched it again and again, each time I tried to focus shape before the distortion. It wasn't clear, not defined, but it was there. I checked the back camera. There was a clip at the same time. I opened it. The same thing happened. Normal image, then a flicker, then heavy distortion, then a skip. When the image came back, nothing was there. I sat there for a while, trying to make sense of it. Cameras glitch sometimes. Bad signal, interference, whatever. But both cameras at the same time, and both losing the same amount of time, that didn't sit right. I went outside and looked up at the roof. Nothing. Clear sky, no marks, no signs of anything. I walked around the house, checking the ground. Nothing there either. No damage, no disturbance. Everything looked exactly as it should. That night, I kept thinking about what Darren had said. Too still. Too low. Around midnight, I checked the cameras again. Live feed. Everything looked normal. No flickering, no distortion. I left the app open on my phone while I sat in the living room. For a while, nothing happened. Then I noticed something small. The image looked slightly delayed. Not by much. Just enough that when a car passed at the end of the street, the light shift didn't match what I expected. I told myself it was just the connection. Closed the app. Tried to ignore it. Around 2 a.m., I went to bed. I don't remember falling asleep. The next thing I remember is waking up suddenly. No noise, no movement, just that same feeling, like something had been there. I stayed still, listening. The room was completely quiet. Too quiet. I checked the time. 2:16. I lay there for a second, trying to calm down. Then I heard it, a faint hum, low, steady, not loud, more like a pressure than a sound. I sat up slowly. The hum didn't change. It felt like it was coming from above, not inside the house, above it. I got out of bed and went to the window, pulled the curtain back slightly. The street was empty, dark, normal, but the hum stayed. I looked up. The sky looked wrong, not visibly, just deeper than it should have been, like there was more space there. The pressure in my ears started then. I swallowed, it didn't clear. I stepped back from the window. The moment I did, the hum stopped, completely. I stood there for a second. Then I went back to bed. In the morning, I checked the cameras again. There was a new clip, same time. I opened it, normal image, then the flicker, then the distortion, then the skip. 7 seconds missing, but this time the shape was clearer. Still not defined, but larger. Closer to the frame. It seemed to cover more of the sky above the house. I replayed it. The distortion was worse this time. The image broke into blocks, stretched in strange directions, and in one frame, just one, the sky looked warped, like it had been pulled inward. Then it was gone. The image returned to normal. I went outside again, looked up, nothing. No sign of anything. But when I stood directly in the middle of the driveway, I felt it. A slight pressure in my ears. Barely there, I shifted a step to the side. It went away. Step back, it returned. I stood there for a minute, testing it. It was faint, just enough to notice. I haven't told Darren what I saw on the cameras. He still asks sometimes if I've noticed anything else. I just tell him no. But every now and then, when I check the footage late at night, I pause right before the flicker, and I try to see that shape again. It never looks the same twice. I noticed it because the car shouldn't have been moving. I was parked in a lay-by just off a coastal road, the kind that runs along cliffs with nothing but dark water on one side and open fields on the other. I'd pulled over to take a break because I'd been driving for a couple hours and my eyes were starting to go. It was late, around 1, maybe later. Cold enough that the inside of the car had that faint chill you only get when the engine's been off for a while. I'd turned everything off. Engine, lights, radio, just sitting there in the dark, phone in my hand, not really doing anything. The only light came from the dashboard fading out and the faint glow of the sky. It was quiet, but normal quiet. You could still hear the wind off the water, distant and steady. I remember leaning my head back, closing my eyes for a second. That's when I felt it. A vibration, not from the engine, from the seat. It was brief, just a low, steady buzz that lasted maybe a second or two, like something passed through the car rather than coming from it. I opened my eyes immediately. The car was still. No shaking, no movement. Everything looked normal. I sat there waiting to see if it would happen again. Nothing. I glanced at the dashboard. Still off. No lights. I reached forward and turned the key slightly, just enough to bring the electronics on. The display lit up. Everything looked normal. No warnings, no issues. I leaned back again, trying to figure out what I just felt. That's when I noticed the mirror. The rear view mirror. There was a faint glow in it. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, but it stayed. A soft, pale light sitting somewhere behind the car. Not bright enough to illuminate the interior. Just enough to be visible. I turned my head slightly, looking over my shoulder. There was nothing there. Just darkness. The lay-by behind me, empty. No cars. No lights. I looked back at the mirror. The glow was still there. Same position, same faint intensity. I leaned forward slightly, adjusting the angle of the mirror. The glow shifted with it, staying in the same relative position, like it was actually there, behind the car. I felt that slight pressure in my ears then. Subtle, like a change in air pressure. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I stared at the mirror. The glow didn't flicker, didn't move, just stayed. I reached over and turned the headlights on. The road behind me lit up. The lay-by, the edge of the road, everything visible. There was nothing there. No source for the glow. I looked back at the mirror. The glow was still there, unaffected by the headlights. That's when my chest tightened. I turned the headlights off again. Darkness returned. The glow in the mirror didn't change. I adjusted the mirror again, tilting it slightly downward. The glow shifted with it, still centered, still behind me. I leaned closer to it. The pressure in my ears increased. I could feel it in my jaw now. I kept my eyes on the mirror. The glow pulsed. Once. Very faint. Just a slight increase in brightness. And for a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not a shape. More like a darker area moving through the light. I blinked. It was gone. The glow returned to its steady state. The pressure peaked, sharp enough to make me wince. I leaned back quickly. The pressure eased slightly. I looked over my shoulder again. Still nothing. No light. No movement. I turned back to the mirror. The glow had shifted slightly, not in a smooth way, just moved, now a bit higher in the frame. I adjusted the mirror again. It followed, always staying centered. I gripped the steering wheel without realizing it. The car felt too still. The air inside felt heavier, like it wasn't moving. I reached for the door handle. The moment my hand touched it, the glow dimmed. Not gone, just reduced. The pressure in my ears dropped slightly. I froze, didn't open the door. The glow held its position. I slowly took my hand off the handle. The glow brightened again, back to where it had been. The pressure returned. That's when I decided to leave. I turned the key, starting the engine. The car came to life. The moment it did, the glow flickered. Not like a light going out, more like it lost focus for a second. Then it steadied again. I put the car into gear. As soon as I started moving forward, the glow shifted. It stayed in the mirror for a second, then it drifted upward. Slowly, the pressure in my ears dropped, the glow rose higher in the mirror. Then it was gone, completely. The mirror showed only darkness behind me. Normal. The pressure disappeared. The air inside the car felt normal again. I drove away without looking back. The rest of the road was empty. No other cars, no lights. Everything felt normal. When I got home, I checked the time, 2:18. That didn't make sense. I'd pulled over just after 1. There was no way it had been that long. I sat in the driveway for a minute before getting out. The car idled normally, no vibration, no issues. I turned it off. Everything went quiet, normal quiet. But now, sometimes, when I sit in the car at night and glance at the rearview mirror, there's always that moment where I expect to see something there, not reflecting anything, just waiting behind me. I noticed it because my foot hit the pavement before the shadow moved. I was walking home from a late shift, cutting through a quiet residential street I'd used 100 times before. It was just after midnight, dry, cold, no wind. The kind of night where everything feels a bit sharper than usual. There were streetlights spaced out along the road, casting those long, stretched shadows that move with you as you walk. I wasn't really paying attention at first. Just hands in my pockets, head down, thinking about nothing. Then I saw it. My right foot stepped forward. But the shadow didn't. Not straight away. It stayed half a step behind, just for a fraction of a second. Then it caught up. I stopped walking, looked down. The shadow settled in place, normal again. I shifted my weight slightly. It followed, exactly as it should. I stood there for a second, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. Then I took another step. This time, I watched carefully. My foot moved. The shadow followed. No delay. I exhaled slowly, telling myself I'd just misjudged it. The angle of the light, maybe. I started walking again. A few steps in, it happened again. My leg moved forward. The shadow lagged. Not by much, just enough that I noticed it clearly this time. Then it snapped forward, matching me. I stopped again. My chest tightened slightly. I looked up at the streetlight above me. It was steady. No flicker. I looked down again. The shadow was normal, perfectly aligned. I turned slowly in place. It rotated with me, no delay. Everything looked fine. I took a step backward. The shadow moved with me. I stepped forward again. It followed. No issue. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself it was just my eyes. Then I started walking again, slower this time. Watching each step. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, just as I passed under the next streetlight, it lagged again, this time, longer. Maybe half a second, long enough that it felt wrong, like it wasn't connected to me properly. Then it slid forward and matched me again. I stopped immediately. The silence around me felt heavier than before. No wind, no distant noise. Even the faint hum of something far away was gone. I looked up. The sky was mostly clear, but there were thin clouds drifting slowly overhead. That's when I noticed the light. It was faint, barely visible. A dim patch above me, moving between the clouds. Not bright enough to cast any light onto the ground. Just there. I stared at it. The moment I focused on it, I felt a slight pressure in my ears. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I looked back down at my shadow. It was normal. Still. I took a step forward. The shadow didn't move. Not at all. It stayed where it was, completely still. My foot landed ahead of it. For a split second, it looked like I'd stepped out of it. Then it slid forward, catching up. The pressure in my ears increased. I could feel it in my jaw now. I stopped walking. The shadow held its position. I didn't move. The dim light above shifted slightly. Not in a smooth way. It just adjusted. Now directly overhead. I felt that tightness in my chest again. I looked around quickly. The street was empty. No cars. No movement. No sound. I looked back at the ground. My shadow looked normal again. Connected. I took another step. It lagged again. Longer this time. Almost a full second. Then it snapped forward. The pressure peaked, sharp enough to make me wince. I looked up again. The dim light pulsed. Once. Faint, but noticeable. And for a moment I thought I saw something around it. Not a shape. More like the sky around it wasn't lining up properly, like a slight distortion. Then it was gone. The light dimmed further, almost invisible. I stepped back. The shadow moved normally. No delay. I stepped forward again. It lagged. My chest tightened further. I didn't like the pattern. Forward, it lagged. Backward, it didn't. I took another step back. The shadow followed perfectly. The pressure eased slightly. I kept stepping back. Each step, the pressure reduced. The light above drifted slightly away, not directly following, just moving. The shadow behaved normally again. I stopped, waited. Nothing happened. The light above faded further, until I couldn't see it anymore. The pressure in my ears dropped completely. The silence broke. A distant car passed somewhere far off. A faint breeze moved through the street. Everything felt normal again. I stood there for a minute, looking at the ground. My shadow moved exactly as it should. No delay, no issue. I walked the rest of the way home without stopping. Everything stayed normal. Streetlights, shadows, nothing out of place. When I got home, I checked the time. 1:48. That didn't make sense. I'd left work just after 1. The walk should have taken maybe 20 minutes. I stood there in the hallway for a bit, trying to work it out. It didn't add up. The next night, I walked the same route again. Same time, same streetlights, everything normal, no lag, no light overhead. But every now and then, when I'm walking under a streetlight, there's a moment where I expect it. That split second where my shadow doesn't move with me, like it's deciding whether to follow. I noticed the compass first because it didn't settle. I was hiking along a narrow ridge trail out past Glen Oren, the kind that runs along the top of a long rise with a steep drop on one side and a gradual slope on the other. It wasn't a hard route, just exposed in places, so you stay aware of where you're stepping. It was late afternoon when I started, and by the time I got up onto the ridge, the sun was already low. The sky was clear, but there was a cold wind coming across from the east, steady enough that you could hear it moving through the grass. I stopped near a break in the ridge to check my direction. The trail wasn't marked well in that section, and I wanted to make sure I was heading the right way before it got darker. I pulled out my compass. The needle swung like it should. Then it stopped, but not where it should have. It was off slightly, maybe 10 degrees. Not a huge amount, but enough that I noticed. I turned my body slowly, watching it. The needle lagged a little, then caught up, still off. I tapped the casing with my finger. It moved, then settled back to that same wrong position. I frowned, looking around. There wasn't anything nearby that should have interfered with it. No metal, no structures, nothing. Just rock, grass, and open sky. I tried it again. Same result. The needle held steady, just wrong. I told myself it was probably just a faulty reading. I'd had the compass for years. Could have been wearing out. I put it away and started walking again, using the shape of the ridge instead. After a few minutes, I stopped again and checked. Still off, same angle. That's when I started paying attention. The wind had dropped, not gradually, just stopped. One moment it was moving through the grass, the next it wasn't. Everything went still. I stood there listening. No wind. No distant sounds, nothing. Even my own breathing sounded too loud. I shifted my weight slightly. The sound of my boot on the ground felt flat, like it didn't carry. I pulled the compass out again. The needle had shifted further. Not by much, but enough that it was clearly wrong now. And it wasn't settling. It drifted slowly, then stopped. I turned in place, trying to line it up with the direction I knew I'd come from. It didn't match. Not even close. I felt that slight pressure in my ears then, like when you change altitude too quickly. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I looked out over the horizon. The ridge dipped down ahead, then rose again in the distance. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint, barely there, just above the horizon, slightly to the right of where I was facing. At first, I thought it was just the last bit of sunlight catching something, but the sun was already below the ridge behind me. This was separate, a soft, pale glow, not bright enough to light anything, just present. I stared at it, trying to make sense of it. It pulsed. Once. Slow. The brightness increased slightly, then faded back. I felt the pressure in my ears increase at the same time. I took a step forward without thinking. The glow didn't move, but something about it changed. The edges became slightly more defined, like it was focusing. I stopped. The compass needle shifted again. Now it was drifting slowly, not settling at all. Just rotating slightly, then stopping, then moving again. I looked down at it, then back at the glow. The air around me felt heavier, not physically, just off, like something was pressing down. I took another step forward. The pressure spiked, sharp enough to make me wince. The glow pulsed again, this time slightly brighter, and for a second I thought I saw something within it. Not a shape I could describe, more like a darker area moving through the light. I blinked. It was gone. The glow returned to that faint, steady state. I stood there, not moving. The compass needle slowed its movement, then stopped. Still wrong. Completely wrong. I turned slightly to the left. The needle didn't follow properly. It lagged behind, then overshot, like it couldn't find a stable position. I felt that tightness in my chest start to build. The silence around me felt too complete. No wind, no distant noise, just nothing. I looked back at the glow. It had dimmed slightly, not fading, just less intense. I took a step back. The pressure eased slightly. The compass needle slowed. I took another step back. The pressure dropped further. The glow stayed where it was, but it didn't follow me. It just sat there above the horizon. I kept stepping back along the ridge. Each step, the pressure reduced. The compass needle steadied a little more. The glow dimmed gradually. After a few steps, it pulsed once more, very faint. Then it faded. Not instantly, just thinning out until it wasn't there anymore. The wind came back, all at once, moving through the grass like it had before. The silence broke. I could hear distant sounds again. Faint, but there. I stopped and pulled out the compass again. The needle snapped into place, perfectly aligned. No drifting, no delay. I stood there for a minute, looking back at the horizon. Nothing. No glow. Just the fading light of evening. I made my way back down the ridge after that. Didn't feel like staying. When I got to the car, I checked the time. 7:36. That didn't make sense. I'd checked earlier when I reached the ridge. It had been just after 6. There was no way it had been that long. I drove home without stopping. Later that night, I took the compass out again, tested it in the garden. It worked perfectly, no issues. But now, whenever I check it out in open ground, there's always a moment where I wait, just to see if it's going to drift again. And sometimes for a second, it feels like it might. The power went out while I was brushing my teeth. No flicker, no warning, just everything cutting off at once. The light above the sink, the fan, even the small LED on the shaver beside it, all gone. I stood there for a second, toothbrush still in my mouth, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The house went completely quiet. Not just normal quiet, but that kind where you suddenly realize how much background noise there usually is. The fridge, the pipes, the faint hum from somewhere, all of it gone. I rinsed my mouth and walked into the hallway. It was darker than it should have been. Usually you get some light bleeding in from outside, street lights or neighboring houses, but there was almost nothing. I grabbed my phone from the table and turned the screen on. No signal. That wasn't normal. Even during outages, I usually got at least one bar. I walked to the front window and pulled the curtain back. The entire street was dark. Every house, no porch lights, no windows lit, nothing. That's when I noticed the sky. At first, it just looked like low cloud cover, thick, heavy, sitting over everything. Then I saw the glow. It was faint, not like lightning or anything bright, just a soft, pale light coming from within the clouds. Not above them. Inside. I stared at it, trying to figure out what I was looking at. It didn't spread across the sky. It was localized, like a patch of cloud maybe directly above the middle of the street. The edges were soft, but defined enough that you could tell where it started and ended. I stepped closer to the glass. The glow didn't illuminate anything below it. The rooftop stayed dark. The road stayed dark. It was like the light existed separately from everything else. I felt a slight pressure in my ears. Subtle at first. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I stood there, watching. The glow didn't flicker. It didn't pulse. It just stayed steady. I opened the front door and stepped outside. The moment I did, the pressure in my ears increased. The air felt still. Not just calm, completely still. No wind at all. The glow above looked slightly brighter from outside. Still faint, but more noticeable. I took a few steps onto the pavement. The street was empty. No one else outside, no sound. Even distant traffic was gone. I looked up. The clouds didn't move. They just sat there, heavy and low. And that glow inside them felt contained. Like it wasn't spreading through the cloud the way light normally would. I stood there for maybe a minute. Then I noticed something else. The shape of the glow shifted, not by moving across the sky, but by tightening. The edges became more defined, like it was focusing. The pressure in ears increased again. I felt it in my jaw now. I took a step back toward the house. The glow changed slightly, not dimming, just adjusting. like it had reacted to my movement. I stopped. The glow held steady. I stepped forward again. Same thing. A slight change in the shape. My chest tightened. I didn't move after that. I just stood there looking up. Then for a second, I thought I saw something within the cloud. Not a shape I could define. More like a darker area passing through the glow. It moved slowly, too slowly for anything natural. I blinked. It was gone. The glow returned to that uniform, soft brightness. The pressure in my ears peaked, sharp enough to make me wince. And then, just like that, it faded. Not instantly, but quickly. The light dimmed, the edges softened, and within a couple of seconds, it was gone. The clouds looked normal again, dark, featureless. At the exact same moment, the power came back. Street lights flickered on. House lights snapped back to life. The hum of electricity filled the air. It was so sudden it made me flinch. I looked around. Everything looked normal again. A couple houses down, I saw a light come on in a window. No one else seemed to be outside. I went back inside and closed the door. The house felt loud again. Fridge humming, pipes shifting, all the usual sounds. I checked the time on my phone, 11:56. That didn't make sense. The power had gone out just after 11. There was no way it had been nearly an hour. I stood there for a minute, trying to work it out. It didn't add up. Later, I checked the local outage report. It said the power had been out for 8 minutes. Not nearly as long as it had felt. I went back to the window and looked up again. The clouds were still there, but now they looked normal. Just heavy, low clouds with no light inside them. I stood there for a while, staring at the same patch of sky. Nothing changed. But for a second, just before I stepped away, I thought I saw a faint brightness deep inside the cloud. Not enough to call it a glow, just enough that I noticed it. Then it was gone. I noticed it because it reflected back too clean. I was driving home late, cutting through a stretch of road that runs between open farmland and a line of scattered trees. It was just after midnight. Clear sky, no clouds, but no moon either, so it was darker than usual. There weren't any streetlights out there, just my headlights and the occasional reflective marker. I'd driven that road plenty of times before, so I knew how it looked in the dark. You get used to how far your lights reach, where things start to fade out. That's why it stood out immediately. There was a reflection ahead, but it wasn't on the road. It was above it. At first, I thought it was a sign. That quick flash you get when your headlights catch metal at the right angle. But it didn't behave like one. It stayed there, fixed. I slowed down slightly, trying to get a better look. The reflection didn't change as I moved, heck, which it should have if it was a sign or anything static. It just held its position, bright and sharp. It looked metallic. That's the only way I can describe it. Not glowing, not emitting light, just reflecting it back in a clean, solid way. And it was high, maybe 15 feet above the road. I took my foot off the accelerator and let the car roll. The rest of the road ahead stayed dark, normal. Only that spot was reflecting. I leaned forward slightly, squinting. There was no pole, no structure, nothing holding it up, just that reflective surface sitting in the air. My chest tightened a bit. I slowed to almost a stop. The moment I did, I noticed something else. The sound inside the car felt muted. The engine was still running, but it sounded dampened, like the noise wasn't traveling properly. Even the tires on the road seemed quieter. I cracked the window. Nothing. No wind, no distant noise, just silence. The reflection flickered slightly, not like a light going out, more like it shifted angle for a second. Then it steadied again. That's when I saw the edge of it, not clearly, but there was a shape around the reflection. Smooth, angular, like a flat surface tilted just enough to catch my headlights. The pressure in my ears started then. Subtle at first, I swallowed. It didn't clear. I kept my eyes locked on it. The thing didn't move, it just stayed there, reflecting back at me. I tapped the brakes and stopped completely. For a second, I just sat there. Then it tilted. There was no gradual motion, no smooth rotation. It just changed. 1 second it was angled toward me, reflecting the light. The next, it had shifted upward. The reflection vanished instantly. Now it was just a faint, darker shape against the sky. Hard to see. The pressure in my ears increased. I felt it in my jaw, a tight, uncomfortable pull. I gripped the wheel without realizing it. The shape hovered there for maybe a second. Then it moved. Not forward, not backward. Up, straight up. And not like anything I've seen before. It didn't accelerate, it didn't build speed, it was just there, and then higher again, each position appearing without the movement between them, like it was skipping through space. Within a second or two, it was just a faint outline, then gone, completely. The pressure in my ears dropped instantly. The silence broke. I could hear the engine properly again, the faint hum of the road under the tires. Everything snapped back to normal. I sat there for a second, staring at the empty sky. Nothing. No light. No movement. I checked the road ahead. Clear. I slowly pressed the accelerator and started moving again. The spot where it had been passed under my headlights. There was nothing there. No debris, no marks, nothing unusual. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. Everything felt normal again. Streetlights came back as I got closer to town. Other cars, distant noise, all the usual stuff. When I got home, I sat in the car for a minute before getting out. I checked the time on the dashboard. 1:42. That didn't make sense. I'd left work just after 12:30. The drive should have taken maybe 25 minutes. Even with slowing down, it shouldn't have been that late. I went inside, still thinking about it. Later, I checked my phone, no messages, no missed calls, the time matched. The next day, I drove that same stretch again in daylight. Everything looked normal. Flat road, open fields, no poles, no wires, nothing that could have been hanging above it. I stopped at roughly the same spot and got out. Looked up, clear sky, nothing there. I stood there for a minute trying to picture where it had been. The height, the angle, it didn't line up with anything. I got back in the car and drove off. But now, whenever I drive at night and see something reflect ahead, even just a normal sign, there's always that moment where I expect it to stay there, suspended, waiting for me to get closer. I noticed them because they were too high. I was driving back from a late shift, taking a back road that cuts through farmland between two villages. It's the kind of road you only use if you live nearby. Narrow, uneven, no streetlights. That night, the fog was thick. Not the kind that rolls in patches. It was solid, sitting low over everything, swallowing the road ahead. My headlights were just lighting up a wall of white, maybe 20 feet in front of me. I was driving slow, maybe 25, just following the faint edges of the road and hoping nothing came the other way. For a while, it was just that. The steady hum of the engine, the tires on damp tarmac, and the fog pressing in. Then I saw the lights. 2 points, faint at first, somewhere ahead. I assumed it was another car, but something didn't line up. They were too high. Not by a little, by a lot. At first I thought maybe it was just the fog distorting things. Depth gets weird in heavy fog, but lights can look like they're floating. So I kept driving. The lights got brighter as I got closer. Still too high. They were sitting above where a car should be, like above the height of a van even. I slowed down more. The lights didn't move. No shift left or right, no bounce from the road, nothing. Just 2 steady points hovering in the fog. I felt that slight tension start in my chest. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The fog was so thick I couldn't see anything below the lights. No outline of a car, no reflections off the road. Just those 2 points. I tapped the brakes and brought the car to a stop. The lights stayed where they were, still, too still. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. The engine was running, but it sounded muted, like the sound wasn't carrying properly. I cracked the window slightly. No wind, no distant noise, nothing. Just that heavy silence. And those lights. The pressure in my ears started then, subtle at first, like going up in elevation. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I kept staring at the lights. They didn't flicker, didn't change intensity, just hung there. I tried to judge the distance. They felt far, but also not. The fog made it impossible to tell. I took my foot off the brake slightly and let the car roll forward a bit. The lights didn't react. No shift, no movement, still too high. The pressure in my ears increased. I could feel it in my jaw now. I stopped again, sat there. For a second, I thought maybe it was something on a hill. But I knew the road. There wasn't any elevation like that ahead. It was flat for miles. I reached up and flashed my high beams. The fog lit up brighter in front of me. The lights didn't change. No reflection, no glare, just those same 2 points. That's when I realized something else. They weren't lighting the fog. Everything else in front of me was glowing from my headlights. The fog around those lights stayed darker, like the light wasn't interacting with it. I felt that tightness in my chest get worse. I looked around quickly. Nothing else, just the road disappearing behind me into the same white haze. I turned my attention back to the lights. They had moved, not forward or back, just slightly higher, no motion. One moment they were there, the next they were a bit further up. I froze. The pressure in my ears spiked. Sharp enough to make me wince, I swallowed hard. The lights stayed in that new position. Still steady, still not illuminating anything. I thought about turning around, but something about the road, the fog, made that feel worse. So I stayed where I was, watching, waiting. Then they shifted again, higher, same way. No movement in between, just a jump. Now they were well above where any vehicle could be, and still nothing beneath them. No shape, no body, just those 2 points. The silence felt heavier, like it was pressing down. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. The pressure in my ears peaked. Then suddenly, the fog started to thin. Not gradually, just pulled back, like a curtain being lifted. The road ahead became visible. The hedges on either side came into view, and the lights were gone. Completely. No fading, no movement away, just not there anymore. The normal sounds came back at the same time. Wind, faint, but there. A distant car somewhere far off. The engine sounded normal again. I sat there for a second, staring at the now clear road. Nothing ahead. No car, no lights. I drove forward slowly, past the spot where I thought they'd been. There was nothing there, just the road stretching out, empty. I kept driving, a little faster now. The fog had mostly cleared. Everything looked normal. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a minute before getting out. Checked the time. 2:06. That didn't make sense. I'd left work just before 1. The drive should have taken maybe 30 minutes. Even with slowing down, it shouldn't have been that long. The next day, I drove that same road again in daylight. Everything looked exactly as it should. Flat land, no hills, no structures, nowhere those lights could have been coming from. I stopped at the same stretch, got out of the car, stood there, looking down the road. Nothing. But for a second, just a second, I felt that same pressure in my ears again. Faint. Then it was gone. I got back in the car and drove off. I haven't taken that road at night since. I noticed it because I thought it was the boiler at first. It started as this low hum somewhere in the house. Not loud, not even really a sound at first, more like a feeling. I was in the living room, sitting on the couch with the TV on low, just winding down after work. The noise didn't match anything. The boiler makes a kind of rattling hum sometimes, but this was steadier, deeper. It didn't fluctuate at all. I muted the TV, the hum stayed. I sat there for a second, trying to place it. It felt like it was coming from above me, but also kind of everywhere at once. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. Same thing. No change in volume, no direction. I checked the boiler anyway, just in case. Put my hand on it. Cold. Off. The hum didn't react. That's when I started noticing it in my ears. Not ringing, more like pressure, like when you're on a plane and your ears won't quite pop. I swallowed. Nothing. I moved back into the hallway. Still there. Completely steady. I looked up at the ceiling without really thinking about it. The feeling got stronger. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed it. I stood there for a few seconds, just listening. Then I walked upstairs. The hum followed. Same level, same tone. Didn't matter where I went. Bedroom, bathroom, landing. It didn't change. That's what made it feel wrong. Most house noises shift when you move around. You get closer, it gets louder. You move away, it fades. This didn't. It stayed fixed. I went back downstairs and stood in the middle of the living room again. The pressure in my ears was worse now. I could feel it in my jaw, like a tightness. I picked up my phone and checked the time. 11:18. I remember thinking it hadn't been that long since I'd sat down. I stood there for another minute, trying to figure out what it could be. Then I had the thought that maybe it was coming from outside, some kind of generator or distant machinery. So I went to the front door. The moment I opened it, the hum stopped. Completely. No fade, no drop. Just gone. The pressure in my ears vanished at the same time. It was so sudden it made me pause in the doorway. Outside, everything sounded normal. Faint wind, a car somewhere in the distance, nothing unusual. I stepped out onto the pavement. Still nothing. No hum, no pressure. I turned back toward the house. The moment I stepped inside, it came back. Same exact hum, same pressure in my ears. I stopped just inside the doorway, listened, stepped back outside. Gone. Inside again. Back. I stood there for a second, doing that back and forth. Every time I crossed the threshold, it switched instantly. No delay, no gradual change, just on and off. That's when it started to feel wrong. I stepped fully outside and closed the door behind me. The silence felt normal, not heavy, not muted, just regular night. I looked up. The sky was clear, a few stars visible between the rooftops. Nothing unusual. I stood there for maybe a minute, just listening. Then I noticed something else. The air felt still. Not completely, but more than usual, like there wasn't any movement above the houses. I walked a few steps down the driveway. Still nothing. No hum, no pressure. I turned back toward the house. Something about it looked slightly off, not visibly different, just the edges didn't feel right. Like the shape of it was slightly out of alignment. I shook it off, walked back to the door, opened it. The hum hit me immediately, stronger than before. The pressure in my ears came back with it, sharper this time. I winced and stepped inside fully, closed the door. The sound settled to that same steady level. I stood there, breathing slowly, trying to stay calm. Then I noticed something. The ceiling light above me looked dimmer, not flickering, just slightly reduced. I stared at it. It didn't change. The hum stayed constant. I walked into the living room again, sat down. The sound didn't shift at all. It felt like it was coming from above the house, not inside it, like something was sitting overhead, just out of reach. I stood up again. The pressure in my ears increased slightly when I looked up. I moved toward the window and pulled the curtain aside. Looked out. Nothing. Street empty. No lights, no movement. I stepped back from the window. The pressure eased a little. I stood there for a while, not really sure what to do. Then I decided to go outside again. I opened the door. The moment I stepped out, the hum cut off. Same as before. Complete silence. I looked up again. This time I noticed something. A faint patch in the sky. Not a light, just a slightly darker area against the stars. Hard to see. I squinted, trying to focus. For a second, it looked like the stars behind it weren't quite lining up, like they were slightly distorted. Then it shifted. Not across the sky, just adjusted, like it had moved a small distance without crossing the space in between. The moment it did, I felt a brief pressure in my ears again. Even though I was outside, then it was gone. The sky looked normal. The pressure disappeared. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to process it. Then I went back inside. The hum was gone, completely. No pressure, no sound. Everything felt normal again. I walked through the house, checking each room. Nothing. No sign of it. I checked the time again. 11:52. That didn't make sense. It hadn't felt like more than 10 minutes had passed. I stood there for a while, just thinking. Eventually, I went to bed. The rest of the night was quiet. No hum, no pressure. But now, sometimes when I'm sitting in the living room late at night, I notice how the house sounds, the normal noises. And every now and then, just for a second, I feel that same pressure in my ears again, like something is right above the roof, waiting for me to step inside. I noticed it because the fire got too loud. I was camping alone in a patch of woodland just outside a place called Graythorn. Nothing remote, just a quiet stretch of trees with a small clearing I'd used before. It was late autumn, cold enough that you could see your breath once the sun dropped, but not freezing. I got there mid-afternoon, set up the tent, gathered some wood, all the usual stuff. By the time it got dark, I had a small fire going and was just sitting there, eating from a tin and listening to the woods. It sounded normal at first, leaves shifting, the occasional crack of a branch, something moving in the distance. Nothing you'd question. Around maybe 9 or so, I started noticing how steady everything felt. Not quieter exactly, just consistent. No sudden sounds, no changes. Like the whole place had settled into one level. I didn't think much of it. I threw another bit of wood onto the fire, watched it catch, and leaned back. That's when it happened. Everything dropped out. Not gradually, just gone. The background noise, the little movements, even the faint breeze through the trees, all of it stopped at once. The only thing left was the fire, and it sounded wrong. Every crack and pop was too sharp, too isolated, like the sound wasn't going anywhere, just staying right there in front of me. I sat up straight. The silence felt heavy, not just quiet, but like something pressing down. I remember saying hello under my breath, just to hear something. My voice didn't carry. It sounded flat, like it got absorbed immediately. I stood up slowly, brushing leaves off my hands. The moment I moved, I felt a slight pressure in my ears, like going up a hill too fast. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I took a few steps toward the edge of the clearing. The firelight faded behind me, and the trees ahead looked darker than they should have been. Not just because of the light. They looked deeper, like there was more space between them than there actually was. I stopped, listened. Nothing. No insects. No birds. Not even the distant hum you sometimes get from far-off roads. Just silence. Then I saw it. At first I thought it was just my eyes adjusting. A faint shimmer between the trees, maybe 20 feet ahead. Not a light. Not exactly. More like the air itself was bending. Like heat rising off a road, but colder in tone. It moved. Not fast. Just sliding from one tree to the next. I stayed completely still. The shimmer didn't disturb anything. No branches moved. No leaves shifted. It just passed through the space. I felt that pressure in my ears increase. It spread slightly into my jaw, a dull, tight feeling. I took a step back. The moment I did, the shimmer paused. Not dramatically. Just stopped. Like it had noticed. My chest tightened. I didn't move again. The shimmer held there for a second. Then it shifted. Not in a smooth way. It just changed position slightly, like it skipped a frame. Now it was closer. Maybe 15 feet away. Still no sound. Still no movement in the trees. I took another slow step back toward the fire. The pressure spiked. Sharp enough to make me wince. The shimmer shifted again. Closer. I turned my head slightly, trying to keep it in my peripheral vision without staring directly at it. That's when I noticed something else. The darkness around it wasn't consistent. The space behind it looked wrong, like it didn't line up with the rest of the woods. I blinked. It stayed. The fire behind me crackled again, louder than it should have been. The sound didn't feel like it was coming from behind anymore. It felt like it was right next to me. I stepped back again, closer to the fire. The moment I did, the shimmer moved, this time faster. It slid between two trees, then stopped again, still closer than before. I could feel something in my chest now, not a vibration, more like a pressure, like standing near something heavy you can't see. I didn't want to turn my back on it, but I also didn't want to get any closer. I took another step back. The firelight reached my feet again. The shimmer didn't follow immediately. It stayed where it was. Then, slowly, it moved sideways, across the clearing's edge, maintaining the same distance, keeping parallel to me. That's when it hit me. It wasn't approaching directly, it was matching where I was. I took a step to the left, it shifted left, same speed, same smooth movement. I stopped, it stopped. The pressure in my ears peaked. My head felt tight, like it was being squeezed slightly. I swallowed hard. The moment I did, everything snapped. The silence broke, all at once. Wind through the trees, distant rustling, a faint sound of something moving far off. The fire sounded normal again. The pressure in my ears dropped instantly. I blinked. The shimmer was gone. Just trees. Dark, still, normal. I stood there for a few seconds, not moving. Then I turned slowly, scanning the area. Nothing. No movement, no distortion, just the woods. I went back to the fire and sat down. My hands felt slightly shaky. I stared into the flames, trying to steady myself. Everything sounded normal again. Too normal, almost, like the silence had never happened. I checked the time on my phone. 11:12. That didn't make sense. I'd checked earlier when I was eating. It had been around 9. There was no way 2 hours had passed. I sat there for a while, just thinking. Nothing else happened that night. I stayed by the fire until it burned low, then went into the tent. I didn't sleep much. Every small sound made me tense. In the morning, everything looked completely normal. The trees, the clearing, nothing out of place. But when I walked to the edge where I'd seen the shimmer, I noticed something small. The ground felt slightly colder there. Not by much, just enough that I could feel it through my boots. I stepped back, normal, stepped forward. Cold again. I stood there for a bit, testing it. Then I left. I haven't been back to that spot since. But sometimes when it gets really quiet at night, I notice how the sound around me settles. And for a second, I think about how it felt when everything dropped out completely. Like something had been waiting for it to go silent. I noticed it because the water didn't move the way it should. I was out early, just after sunrise, down by a small reservoir near a place called Wainford. It's not a big spot, just a quiet stretch of water surrounded by low trees and a bit of rough ground. I'd been there a few times before, usually on my own. You don't get much company that early. It had been foggy when I arrived, but it was starting to lift. The surface of the water was still almost flat, with that thin layer of mist hovering just above it. No wind, no ripples, nothing. Perfect for fishing, at least in theory. I'd set up near the edge where the bank slopes down slightly. Cast out a line, settled onto a small folding chair, and just waited. For a while, nothing happened. No bites, no movement, just that quiet you get when everything's damp and still. I remember looking down into the water at one point, just watching the surface. It was clear enough near the edge that you could see a few feet down. Nothing much there, just murky green fading into darker depths. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just the light changing. The sun was coming up behind the trees and the fog was thinning, so I figured it was just a reflection shifting. But it wasn't. There was a faint glow under the surface. It's not bright, just a soft, pale kind of light, like something diffused through the water. It was directly below where I was sitting. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. The glow didn't spread out like sunlight would. It stayed contained, almost like a patch, maybe a couple of feet across. I watched it for a few seconds. The surface of the water above it stayed completely still. No ripples, no disturbance. That's what didn't make sense. If something was producing light under the water, you'd expect some kind of movement, even a slight one, but there was nothing. I shifted in my chair, the glow stayed in place, I glanced at my line, still unmoving. I looked back down, the glow was still there. Then it moved. Not upward, not downward. It slid smoothly across the water beneath the surface. No ripples, no disturbance, just gliding. I sat up straight. The glow moved away from me, slow and steady, maintaining the same size and brightness. I stood up, stepping closer to the edge. The moment I did, I felt a slight pressure in my ears. Subtle at first, like a change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I kept my eyes on the glow. It continued to move, drifting out a bit further from the bank. Then it paused, just held there, under the water. I looked around. The reservoir was empty. No other people, no boats, nothing. Even the birds were quiet. I looked back down. The glow was still there. And for a second, I thought I saw something within it. Not a shape. More like a distortion, like the water inside that glow wasn't behaving the same as the rest. I blinked, trying to focus. The effect faded. The glow dimmed slightly. Then it moved again, this time faster. Still smooth, still without disturbing the surface. It slid further out into the reservoir. I took a step along the bank, following it. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I could feel it in my jaw now. The glow stopped again, maybe 10 or 15 feet from where I'd been sitting. I stood there, watching it. The water above it remained perfectly still. It didn't reflect anything. It didn't cast light onto the surface. It was just there. I felt that tension in my chest start to build, the kind that tells you something isn't right, even if you can't explain why. I crouched down slightly, trying to see deeper. The glow pulsed once, very faint, just a slight increase in brightness. And in that moment, the distortion became clearer. For a split second, I thought I could see a faint outline. Not a fish, not anything I recognized, just something occupying that space. Then it was gone. The glow dimmed again, and then it started moving, faster this time. It slid across the water, heading toward the center of the reservoir. No ripples, no wake. Just that smooth, silent motion. I stood up, following it with my eyes. The pressure in my ears peaked, sharp enough to make me wince. I swallowed hard. Then it stopped. For a second, everything felt completely still. Then the glow lifted. Not out of the water in a way I could clearly see. It just wasn't under the surface anymore. It appeared above it. Same position, same shape, but now in the air, just inches above the water. Still not illuminating anything around it. The surface beneath remained dark. I froze. The glow hovered there for maybe a second. Then it rose, straight up. No acceleration, no sound. Just lifting. The pressure in my ears dropped suddenly. The moment it left the surface, the water below rippled. Not from where it had been. Just a general disturbance like the stillness had broken. I watched it rise. It reached a few feet above the water, paused, then continued upward. Faster. Within a couple seconds, it was above the tree line. Then gone. Completely. The sounds came back. Birds, distant wind, the faint lapping of water against the bank. Everything felt normal again. I stood there for a long time, staring at where it had been. Nothing, just the reservoir. I looked down at the water near the edge. It moved normally now. Small ripples, slight movement. No glow, no distortion. I went back to my chair and sat down. My line hadn't moved. I checked the time on my phone. 7:18, that didn't line up. I'd arrived just after 6. There was no way it had been over an hour. I packed up not long after that. Didn't feel like staying. As I walked back to the car, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The water looked completely normal. Later that day, I went back through my phone, trying to remember exactly when I'd gotten there. It didn't add up. The timing didn't make sense. A few days later, I went back again. Same spot, same time of morning. The water was still. No fog this time. Everything looked normal. I sat there for a while, watching the surface. Nothing happened. But every now and then, I thought I saw a faint change in the water just beneath where I was looking. Not a glow, just something slightly off. Then it would disappear. I only checked the camera because of the dog. I don't even have a dog. That's what made it stick in my head. I woke up around 3:10 in the morning to barking outside. Loud, sharp, right near the front of the house. Not distant, not echoing, like it was just outside the gate. I lay there for a second, trying to place it. My neighbor Claire has a lab, but it doesn't bark like that. This sounded higher, more frantic. It stopped suddenly. No fading out, no footsteps, nothing. Just cut off. I stayed in bed for a minute, listening. Everything was quiet again. Too quiet. No wind, no cars, nothing. I almost got up to check, but I didn't. I just lay back and eventually drifted off again. When I woke up properly in the morning, it felt like a normal night. No sign anything had happened. It wasn't until later, when I was making coffee, that I remembered I had the camera. It's mounted above the front door, angled down toward the driveway and gate. It picks up motion and saves clips automatically. I pulled up the app and scrolled back to around 3. There was a recording. One clip, about 10 seconds long. I tapped it. It started normally. Driveway empty, gate closed, same dim orange glow from the street light down the road. No movement. Then, halfway through the clip, the image flickered, and the entire frame went white. Not bright like a light turning on. It was total. Every part of the image just washed out, like someone had overexposed it completely. I leaned closer to the screen. There was no detail at all. Just white. Then the clip jumped. Not smoothly, it skipped, and the image came back. Same driveway, same angle, but something felt off. I checked the timestamp. The clip started at 3:12:04. After the white flash, it resumed at 3:12:11. 7 seconds missing. The video itself was still 10 seconds long, but there was a gap inside it. That didn't make sense. I replayed it. Same thing. Normal frame, flicker, full white. Then jump forward. No transition. I watched it again, slower this time. Right before the white flash, I noticed something small. At the top edge of the frame, just above the roofline, there was a faint brightening. Not obvious unless you were looking for it, like something entering the frame. Then the whiteout. Then the skip. I sat there for a minute trying to figure out what could cause that. A car passing? But there were no headlights in the frame. No shadows, no movement. And even if there were, it wouldn't wipe out the entire image like that. I checked for other clips. Nothing. No motion detected before or after. Just that one. I went outside to have a look. Everything looked normal. Driveway clean, gate closed, no marks on the ground, no signs of anything. I stood there for a minute, trying to match what I saw on the camera to the actual space. It didn't line up. The area above the roofline where that faint brightening had been. There was nothing there now. Just sky. Later that day, I showed the clip to Claire. Probably just a glitch, she said. These cheap cameras do that sometimes. Does yours ever do this? I asked. She watched it again. No, she said. Not like that. I didn't say anything else. That night I kept thinking about the barking. I hadn't heard it on the clip. There was no audio, but I knew I'd heard it. Around midnight, I checked the camera feed live. Everything looked normal. No distortion, no flickering. I left it open on my phone while I sat in the living room. After about 10 minutes, I noticed something. The image felt slightly delayed. Not enough to be obvious, but when a car passed at the end of the street, the light shift seemed a fraction behind when I expected it. I told myself it was just the connection. I closed the app, went to bed. Sometime during the night, I woke up again. No barking this time, just that same heavy quiet. I checked the time, 2:58. I lay there listening. Then I heard it. Not barking, a faint hum. Low, steady, not coming from inside the house, more like above it. I sat up slowly. The hum didn't change. It wasn't loud, but it felt like it pressed into the air. I got out of bed and went to the window, pulled the curtain back slightly. The street was empty, dark, normal. But the hum stayed. I looked up. The sky looked wrong. Not visibly, just deeper than it should. I stepped back from the window. The moment I did, the hum stopped. Completely. Like it had been cut off. I stood there for a second, then went back to bed. In the morning, I checked the camera again. There was another clip. Same time. I opened it. It started normally. Driveway empty, then the image flickered, and again, the entire frame went white, same as before. I checked the timestamp, 03:17. After the white, it resumed at 3:24, 7 seconds missing again. But this time, I noticed something different. Right before the white flash, there was a shape, not clear, just a darker outline against the sky. It moved slightly downward, then the flash, then the skip. I replayed it a few times. The shape wasn't consistent. It almost looked like distortion, but it was there. I went outside again, standing in the same spot. Looked up. Nothing. Clear sky. No sound. I checked the ground again. Still nothing. But when I stood near the gate, right where the camera pointed, I felt something faint. A slight vibration under my feet. Barely noticeable. I shifted my weight. It went away. Shifted back. It returned. I stepped away from that spot. Nothing. I stood there for a while testing it. It wasn't strong, just enough to notice if you stood still. I haven't seen another white flash since. The camera's been normal every night. No glitches. No missing time. But sometimes when I scroll back through the footage, I pause on those frames just before the flash. And I try to see that shape again. It never looks the same twice. I noticed it because the field stayed dark. I was driving back from visiting my cousin out near Ely, taking one of those narrow farm roads that cut between open fields for miles. It was late, just after midnight, and there wasn't a single car out there. No houses close to the road either, just hedgerows and flat land on both sides. The sky was clear, but there was no moon, so it was darker than usual. My headlights were doing most of the work. I'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes without seeing anything but the road ahead and the occasional reflective marker. That's when I saw the glow. At first, I thought it was a farmhouse light in the distance. It was low, sitting just above the fields on the right side. Soft, pale, not bright enough to be a floodlight or anything like that. I kept driving. Something about it didn't sit right. I glanced back at the road, then at the glow again. It hadn't changed. Still hovering in the same spot, maybe a couple feet above the ground. The thing that got me was the field around it. There was no light spilling onto the grass, no reflection. The ground stayed completely dark, even though the glow was clearly there. I slowed down. My headlights swept a bit further across the field as I eased forward, but they didn't interact with it either. The glow stayed separate, like it wasn't part of the same space. I pulled over slightly, just enough to stop safely on the side of the road. Engine still running, I leaned forward, trying to get a better look. The glow was maybe 50 or 60 meters out, still low, still not lighting anything around it. I cracked the window a bit. No sound, no insects, no wind, just silence. That's when I felt it. A faint pressure in my ears. I swallowed, expecting it to clear. It didn't. I kept my eyes on the glow. It didn't flicker, didn't pulse. It just stayed steady. I reached up and turned off my headlights. The road went dark instantly, but the glow didn't change. If anything, it became more noticeable. Still not illuminating the ground. Still just there. I felt that tension in my chest start to build. I watched it for a few seconds, then it moved. Not sideways, not forward or back. Up, straight up. No acceleration, no build-up. It just lifted, smooth, silent, like it had been pulled upward. I leaned closer to the wheel, watching it. The pressure in my ears increased. I could feel it in my jaw now. The glow rose slowly, maintaining the same shape, the same intensity, still not lighting anything around it. It reached maybe 20 or 30 feet above the ground. Then it paused, just hung there. I held my breath without realizing it. For a second, I thought it might drop back down. Instead, It went higher, faster this time. Still smooth, still silent. Within a few seconds, it was above the height of the hedgerow, then higher than the road. I stepped out of the car without thinking. The moment my feet hit the ground, the pressure in my ears spiked, sharp enough to make me wince. I looked up. The glow was now well above me, and for a second, I thought I saw something around it. Not a solid shape. More like the air around it was slightly distorted, like a faint outline that didn't quite match the sky. Then it shot upward, not fast in the usual sense. There was no visible acceleration. It was just there, and then higher again. In less than a second, it was a small point in the sky, then gone, completely. The pressure in my ears dropped instantly. The silence broke. I could hear wind moving through the fields again, faint but there. A distant car somewhere far off. Everything felt normal again. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the empty sky. Nothing. No trace of it. I got back into the car and turned the headlights on. The field looked normal. Grass, fence line, nothing unusual. I drove forward slowly, passing the spot where I'd seen the glow. I kept glancing to the right. There was nothing there. No marks, no light, nothing out of place. I pulled over again a bit further down and got out. Walked a few steps toward the field. The ground felt normal under my feet, slightly damp, cold. I looked around trying to find any sign of what I'd just seen. Nothing. I went back to the car. When I got in, I checked the time, 1:37. That didn't make sense. I'd left my cousin's just after 12:30. The drive should have taken about half an hour. Even with stopping, it shouldn't have been that late. I sat there for a minute, trying to figure it out. It didn't add up. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping again. Everything stayed normal. Street lights, other cars, no issues. The next day, I went back out there in the afternoon. Same stretch of road. I found the spot easily. The field looked exactly the same. No discoloration, no damage, just grass. But when I stood at the edge of the road and looked out across it, something felt off. The distance didn't feel right, like the space where the glow had been was slightly deeper than the rest. Hard to explain. I stepped forward a bit. It went away. Stepped back. It came back, not strong. Just enough to notice if you were paying attention. I stood there for a while, looking at that same spot. Nothing happened, no light, no movement. But every now and then, I had the feeling that if I stayed there long enough, something would appear again. Not in the same place, but close enough that I'd recognize it. I noticed it because I couldn't place it. I was out behind the house, lying on a blanket in the garden, just looking up. It was one of those clear, cold nights where the sky actually looks sharp. No clouds, barely any light pollution out there. You could see more stars than usual, the kind that make you stop scrolling your phone and just sit still for a bit. My brother's place is out past Kendall, nothing but fields behind it. I was staying there for a few days, helping him with some stuff, and that night I just went outside to get some air. I'd been lying there for maybe 15 minutes, just letting my eyes adjust, picking out the usual patterns I half remembered. That's when I saw it. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Just a dense spread of stars, everything where it should be. Then one of them didn't match. It wasn't brighter or dimmer than the others. It was just slightly off, like it didn't quite line up with the rest of the pattern. I frowned, trying to place it. I'm not an expert or anything, but you get used to certain shapes. This one felt like it was sitting just outside where it should have been. I kept staring at it. After a few seconds, it moved. Not fast, not like a shooting star. It drifted, slowly, just a small shift to the right. I actually sat up a bit when I saw that. Stars don't drift like that, not visibly. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks. The star stopped, held in place again, but now it was slightly out of alignment compared to where it had been before. I looked around at the rest of the sky. Everything else was steady. I checked my position on the blanket, adjusted slightly, thinking maybe I'd shifted and it changed my perspective. But no, that one point was still off. I lay back down, keeping my eyes locked on it. The longer I looked, the more it felt like it didn't belong there. Not in a dramatic way. Just misplaced. Then it moved again. This time, back toward where it had originally been. Same slow drift, same smooth motion, no flickering, no change in brightness. It just slid across the sky. My chest tightened a bit. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. The rest of the stars stayed fixed. Only that one moved. It reached a point and stopped. And just like that, it looked right again, like it had clicked back into place. I stared at it, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. It just sat there like any other star. I let out a slow breath. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, tell myself it was just something passing in front of it or a trick of perspective, but it didn't feel like that. I lay back again, still watching that same spot. After a minute or so, I noticed something else. The air had gone completely still. No wind at all. Not even a slight movement in the grass around me. That didn't seem right for that area. There's usually at least some kind of breeze. I listened. Nothing. No distant cars, no animals, no rustling, just quiet. I became aware of a faint pressure in my ears. It crept in slowly, like a change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I kept my eyes on the sky. The star hadn't moved again. Everything looked normal, but the feeling didn't match it. I sat up again, this time fully. The blanket shifted under me, louder than it should have. I glanced around the garden. The house behind me was dark. My brother had gone to bed earlier. No lights on inside. I looked back up. The star was still there. But now I wasn't sure it was exactly where it had settled. It looked just slightly off again. Not as much as before, just enough that I noticed. I squinted, trying to focus. The pressure in my ears increased. Then, just for a second, I saw something around it. Not a shape, more like the space around that point of light distorted, like a faint ripple. It moved with it. The star drifted again. This time, slower. Barely noticeable, just a slight shift. Then it stopped. The distortion faded. Everything looked normal again. The pressure in my ears dropped suddenly, all at once. I flinched slightly when it did. The sounds came back. Faint wind across the grass, a distant car somewhere. Everything felt released. I sat there, staring at the sky. The star didn't move again. It stayed exactly where it should have been. I lay back down, but I couldn't relax. I kept watching that same patch of sky. Every now and then, I thought I saw it shift slightly, but I couldn't be sure anymore. Eventually, I went back inside, checked the time in the kitchen. 1:22. That didn't make sense. I'd gone out just before midnight. There was no way I'd been out there that long. I stood there for a minute, trying to think it through. It didn't add up. The next night, I went back out again. Same spot, same blanket. The sky was just as clear. I found the same cluster of stars. Looked for the one that had moved. Everything was perfectly aligned, nothing out of place. I stayed out there for almost an hour. Nothing happened. But as I was about to go back inside, I noticed something. One of the stars in that same area looked slightly dimmer than the others. Not moving, just not as bright. I stared at it for a while, waiting. Nothing changed. I went inside after that. But now, whenever I look up at a clear sky, I find myself checking, trying to see if anything looks slightly out of place. And sometimes for a second, I think one of them is just a little bit off. I saw it before I realized what I was looking at. I was out later than usual, just walking back from a friend's place across town. It was one of those quiet residential areas with long rows of parked cars, no traffic at that hour. Probably around 1:30 in the morning. Dry, cold, clear sky. I had my hands in my pockets, just walking without really thinking. That's when I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from a streetlight. It was faint, kind of hovering above one of the parked cars on the left side of the road. But something about it didn't sit right. I slowed down. The car was an old hatchback, dark color, parked halfway under a streetlight. The light above it should have been casting a clear glow onto the roof, the windows, the pavement around it. But this light wasn't doing that. It just sat there, maybe a foot or two above the roof. Dim, pale, almost like a dull white with a hint of blue. And it wasn't reflecting off anything. That's what caught my attention. The roof of the car stayed dark. The light didn't spread. It didn't cast a shadow. It just existed in that spot, separate from everything else. I stopped walking. Stood there for a second, trying to figure it out. I looked up at the streetlight. It was working normally. Slight flicker, same as the others on the street. I looked back at the hovering light, still there, completely steady. I took a few steps closer. The moment I did, I felt a slight pressure in my ears. Not strong, just enough to notice. I swallowed, expecting it to go away. It didn't react to me moving. It stayed exactly where it was. I glanced around the street. Empty. No movement. No sounds. Even the usual distant hum of traffic wasn't there. It felt too quiet. I stepped closer again. Now I was maybe 10 feet from the car. The light looked clearer from this angle. It wasn't a solid point. It had a soft edge, like it faded into the air around it. And there was something else. The space around it looked slightly distorted. Not dramatically, but enough that the background didn't line up perfectly, like a mild ripple. I blinked a couple times. It stayed. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I took another step forward. The moment I did, the light shifted. Not away from me. Up. Just a few inches. No motion in between. 1 second it was there, then slightly higher. I stopped immediately. My chest tightened a bit. The light held its new position, still not reflecting off anything, still just hanging there. I looked at the car again. The roof was still dark, no sign of the light touching it at all. That's when I noticed something else. The air felt colder. Not dramatically, just enough that I could see my breath more clearly than before. I exhaled slowly. The breath lingered longer than it should have. I don't know why, but I reached out slightly. Not to touch it, just instinctively. The moment I lifted my hand, the pressure in my ears spiked, sharp enough to make me wince. I pulled my hand back immediately. The pressure eased again. I stood there trying to make sense of it. The light didn't move. It didn't flicker. It just stayed there. Then, slowly, it dimmed. Not quickly, just a gradual fading. As it dimmed, the distortion around it became more noticeable. For a second, I thought I could see a faint outline around the space it occupied. Not a clear shape, just something that didn't match the air around it. Then the light was gone, completely. No fade out, no afterglow, just gone. The pressure in my ears dropped all at once. The silence broke. I could hear a car in the distance, faint wind moving through the street. Everything felt normal again. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the empty space above the car. Nothing, just the streetlight's normal glow. I walked closer to the car, standing right next to it now. The roof felt normal. Cold, slightly damp from earlier in the night. No warmth, no marks. I stepped back and looked at the spot where the light had been. Nothing unusual. I turned and continued walking home. The rest of the street looked normal. Streetlights, parked cars, nothing out of place. But something felt off, like the space I just walked through didn't match the rest. I kept glancing back over my shoulder. The car was still there, no light above it, just normal. When I got home, I checked the time, 2:18. That didn't make sense. I'd left my friends around 1:20. The walk should have taken maybe 20 minutes. Even with stopping, it shouldn't have been that late. I stood there in the hallway, trying to work it out. It didn't add up. The next day, I walked past the same street in daylight. The car was still there, same spot. Everything looked normal. I stopped next to it again, just to be sure. Nothing unusual. But when I looked at the roof from the same angle as the night before, I noticed something small. A faint patch where the paint looked slightly duller than the rest. Not damaged, just different. Like something had been there for a while. I reached out and ran my hand over it. It felt the same as the rest of the car. No texture difference. I stepped back, looked at the space above it. Clear sky, nothing there. That night, when I went to bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the light itself, but the way it didn't interact with anything around it. Like it wasn't really part of the space it was in. And for a second, just before I fell asleep, I had the feeling that if I went back at the same time, it might still be there. Just not where I expected it. I noticed it before I even opened my eyes. I was lying on my back, just starting to drift off. It had been one of those nights where you're tired, but your brain won't fully shut down. I remember checking the time not long before, 12:47. The room was completely dark, curtains closed, no streetlight bleeding in. I liked it that way. At some point, I became aware of a faint glow. Not in the room, but behind my eyelids. At first, I thought it was just one of those things your eyes do when you're half asleep, random flashes, patterns, whatever. But this wasn't random. It was moving, slowly, like a soft light passing from one side of my vision to the other. I kept my eyes closed, just watching it. It wasn't bright, more like a dull, pale glow, almost gray-blue. It didn't flicker or pulse, it just drifted. I remember thinking maybe it was headlights from a car passing outside, but that didn't make sense. The curtains were thick, and even if light got through, it wouldn't move that slowly. I stayed still, trying to figure it out. The glow continued across, then faded slightly. Then it came back, from the other side. Same slow movement. That's when I opened my eyes. The room was completely dark, no light anywhere. The shape of the wardrobe, the door, the edge of the bed, all just faint outlines in the darkness. I blinked a couple times, letting my eyes adjust. Nothing. I turned my head slightly toward the window, curtains still closed, no gaps, no light leaking through. I lay there for a second, listening. Everything sounded normal. Faint hum of something downstairs, maybe the fridge. No wind, no cars. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks. Closed my eyes again. The glow was still there, same as before, moving slowly across my vision. I opened my eyes again, quicker this time. Dark. Nothing. I felt this small knot of tension in my chest. I sat up slightly, resting on my elbows, and looked around the room properly. Everything looked exactly as it should. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my phone. The screen lit up, bright enough to make me squint. 1:06. I stared at it for a second. That didn't make sense. I'd only been lying there for a few minutes. There was no way it had been nearly 20. I sat there trying to think it through. Maybe I dozed off without realizing it. That happens sometimes, but it didn't feel like I had. I set the phone back down and lay back again. Closed my eyes. The glow came back immediately, stronger this time. Still not bright, but more noticeable. It moved slower now, like it was passing directly over me. I opened my eyes again. Nothing. Same darkness. I felt the pressure in my ears then. Subtle at first, like a slight shift. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I turned onto my side, this facing the wall. Closed my eyes again. The glow changed direction. Instead of moving side to side, it drifted downward, like it was lowering. I opened my eyes. Dark, completely normal. I sat up again, this time fully. The room felt still. Not just quiet, held, like the air wasn't moving at all. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The moment my feet hit the floor, the glow behind my eyes stopped, completely. I blinked a few times. Nothing, just normal darkness when I closed my eyes. I stood there waiting for it to come back. It didn't. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain aside slightly. The street outside was empty. No cars, no movement, just the faint outline of houses across the road. I let the curtain fall back into place. Turned around. That's when I noticed something else, the digital clock on my bedside table. The numbers looked dimmer than usual. Not by much, just slightly. I stepped closer, 1 to 9. I stared at it for a second. Then, right in front of me, the display flickered. Just once. The numbers blurred for a fraction of a second, then stabilized. Still reading 1:09, I reached out and tapped the clock. It responded normally, no delay, no further flickering. I stepped back, the pressure in my ears increased slightly. I felt it in my temples now. I went back to the bed and sat down. Everything felt normal again. The room, the air, the silence. I lay back slowly, closed my eyes, nothing, no glow. I opened them again, dark. I checked my phone one more time, 1:12. I don't remember falling asleep after that. The next thing I remember is waking up in the morning. Sunlight coming through the curtains, everything normal. For a while, I told myself it was just one of those half-asleep things. But later that day, I noticed something that didn't fit. My phone had a sleep tracking app on it. Nothing fancy, just something that logs movement during the night. I opened it out of curiosity. There was a gap, a clean gap in the data, from 12:52 to 1:11. No movement recorded at all, not even the small shifts you make without realizing it, just a flat line. I tried to think back, tried to remember if I'd gotten up, moved around, anything, nothing. It didn't match what I remembered. That night I went to bed at the same time, lay there, waiting. Nothing happened. No glow, no pressure, nothing unusual. Everything was normal. But now, when I close my eyes in the dark, I catch myself watching for it. And sometimes, just for a second, I think I can see something faint moving behind them again.